Howdy. Anyway, finally finishing doing some last minute prep. His plan for today is to go through all of the notes that he's written for the last couple of months. Yeah. Yep, that's it. That's my plan. That's not a very interesting plan. Yeah, let's go find out. So I took pages and pages of notes. I don't actually know. There's no page count in OneNote, I think. Well, okay, this is 550 lines, and then all the system design stuff brings us up to 1,000. So yeah, let's go through these 1,000 lines of notes, I think. Hey Draco, hey Raven, hey Extron. You all have blue names today. And it's the same blue. And even my bot has that blue, although I think that part's random. What are the odds? There are so many colors out there. Yeah, Yush. So I don't really think there's any point delaying today at all. I feel like I should just dive into it and take a look through my notes. Extron's not blue, then Extron must have a random name as well. Anyone who has a random color just randomly picks one of the defaults. And that blue is one of the defaults. No, yours is not blue for me. Oh, well, I guess you just figured that out. I didn't know if you were asking if yours is random as well. Yeah, for those who don't know, you can change it with /color. And if you have, right now it's called Twitch Prime, but apparently it's going to be called Prime Gaming pretty soon, then you can type in any color, not just the default ones. All right, so overall learnings, let's see. Practice, practice, practice. I did that. Interviews are mostly about your thought process, not your solution. This I don't even totally know if I agree with, but I guess we'll find out after the interviews. Hey, the day. Hey, Snell. Yeah, it's going to be called Prime Gaming. We were just talking about this on Discord today. How when it was called Twitch Prime for streams like this that had nothing to do with gaming, it made sense. They're like, oh, hey, you can use your Twitch Prime. But now it's Prime Gaming on music streams and Prime Gaming on science and tech streams, and it doesn't really matter. It defines your account. It sure does. As a streamer, I look at three things when I'm trying to glance at someone's name. There's name length, there's starting letter, and there's color. And those three things are what let me quickly tell who's talking. So every once in a while, there will be someone like your Draco 401. There will be someone like, Dragon King who's got a blue name as well. And I'll just be like, they're the same person now. Those are roughly the same at a glance. Ah, you did change it, yeah. Okay. You're orange, yeah, yeah. So it means that you don't have a color set at all, and it's just randomly picking a tropical banana man. So write unit test. This part I don't think really mattered too much for the time that we were doing things. I don't think interviewers at big companies check to see if you wrote unit tests. I'm actually going to delete this one. Well, maybe I should say write unit tests while you're practicing. Yeah, I think that's good. I'm doing well, tropical banana man. Yeah, doing well. How have you been? Be positive. This one for sure is important. Don't give up when you encounter difficulties. This is kind of the same as be positive. Not quite, but yeah. Simplify problems to base cases or subproblems. Don't need a large lunch during a set of interviews. Iterators and generators can do quite a lot. If your resulting code is longer than about 5 to 10 lines, you can probably simplify. Yep, I think all of this is still pretty good. I think this one is the only questionable one it's about your thought process. Go easy on yourself. Wasn't sure I learned anything. Yeah, man, this document that I've shared a ton, you suck at the coding interview, and I'll link it again just for anyone who's interested. They talk about how you will feel imposter syndrome as you do this, you'll get frustrated as you do this. And by this, I mean studying for like 100 hours for interviews. Been so busy with work. Ooh, a music project. What was the project? I've been wanting to do some kind of music project too. I, every once in a while, get into like, I should be composing. And then sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. But I've never really gotten much better at it, and I need to at some point focus on just mindfully getting better. Try out different techniques, constrain myself in different ways. We made a song from Bomberman Hero. Oh man, I had that game. That was the second one in the series for N64, right? Okay. So what I was talking about here was kind of imposter syndrome and how I think this plays into the be positive. Like sometimes it'll feel like you're not learning, but you kind of are. All right, so problem solving frameworks. This is exactly what I did. Understand the problem, come up with an algorithm, test the algorithm, write pseudocode, test the pseudocode, write code. Yeah. This is the flow I go through when I'm given a technical question. I find that the actual time spent coding is typically very little if I write my algorithm and pseudocode well. Hey Goose, you demand a piano stream now. So in this room that you guys can't see anymore because I've got a green screen now, I had my piano keyboard over on the side, but I didn't have the piano bench anymore. So I had to move this chair over there. And just that simple act of having to move a chair from here just 3 feet to the side meant I never played piano anymore. So we moved it to a different room in the house and now I'm playing a lot more. Kind of crazy how that happens. Say they mention something about themselves, you try to remember that fact about that user, or do you just move on and don't really think about it more? You try to remember, how do you connect to that person without forgetting who it was? Draco, this is something that used to be much, much easier when the stream was smaller. Now what ends up happening is I can maybe remember what people were talking about in the last week, unless they're either a long-time viewer or they also talk in Discord. So I have a general grasp on like who's who, but in a very high level way now. Hey Joe Ross, welcome. Do I use software like music production software? Yeah, the software that I use for that is FL Studio and Sibelius. And so Fruity Loop Studio is mostly for not classical composition. My like favorite genre of classical music is the Romantic era, like Russian compositions. They're just so good. I think Dvorak is like probably favorite non-Russian composer. But man, Russian people sure knew how to make music. Probably still do, but I only listen to stuff from hundreds of years ago. To really stream some music production composing. I've streamed it before. It's just it's usually I'm not very good at it, and I like I said I feel like I need to learn more, and I don't know if streaming helps me learn more. So preparing for an interview, start with training wheels, look at hints for the problems, use the internet to look for pseudocode, etc. Shouldn't jump right to the performance of mock or actual interviews if you haven't practiced. For example, I hadn't written a binary search in forever and didn't think to track the left and right search indices. Does this link work? Yeah, it does. Coming up with a concept of tracking left and right can be difficult under pressure, but it's a relatively basic concept to remember. Yep. So a lot of this stuff for preparing for an interview, I don't think I'm going to need to read anymore, but I still want to go through all of these notes. And I guess this can also serve as a summary for anyone watching this later. Look at other people's solutions. Sites like LeetCode have tons of submissions. Usually you'll find an elegant and easy to understand solution. You should figure out what might have gone wrong with your solution and how you could have arrived at the same conclusion for next time. Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of times with this, you find techniques that you just never thought of before. So there was a crazy one that I had seen where you're doing a depth first search and the path that you're searching through matters. And so what they did is they said like current node.visited equals true and then search with the node's node neighbors, I guess. And then node.visited equals false. Something like this. I wanna actually go find out where I read this down. Yeah, here it was. So this person's solution did something like that. Right here. They set this thing to negative, and then afterward they negate it again. So this is their concept of visited in this case because it had to do with counting gold. But it's very clever. A very clever solution. How do you learn and study for DSA while creating apps for projects? I don't think you do both at once. Yeah. I think you set aside your personal projects for some time and only focus on data structures and algorithms. Okay, what else? The interview should be more about your thought process. As a result, think aloud. Whenever you hit a wall, try to make progress somewhere. Stub functions that you know will exist. Yeah, this is like a minor tip. Write unit tests directly into your solution. And your solution doesn't work. I have a feeling that that writing explicit tests. No, I think this is only good for practicing. Yeah. So I don't advise doing this during an interview because jumping directly to debugging or toggling numbers and booleans in your code may be seen as a weakness, but this is still great for practicing. All right, take care, Tropical Banana Man. Yeah. Thanks for dropping by. Cool to hear about the Bomberman music project. Hey, Kenny. Hey, Marco. I'm doing well. I think yesterday was a really, really good stream. So for anyone who didn't see it, we did behavioral prep, which is probably going to be super boring for most people. And that was the first, I don't remember, 3 hours. And then the rest of the stream was talking about ego. And I think that was just an amazing conversation. It kind of changed my point of view on a couple of things, and I'm going to try to be more mindful about this stuff. Like one of the things was that high ego stems from insecurity or is linked to, I don't know what stems from, I guess, but yeah, I never really thought about that. And it made me consider, what am I insecure about? What purpose or place would I have in a coding world I don't know. Anyway, lots of thoughts. That stream is online. You can watch it. It's yesterday's VOD. Hey, Sisek. Okay, no need to write a function. Its implementation will be very basic. You can just write out a call to it and say what it would do and maybe even how you'd write it. When you've got your algorithm, ask the interviewer if you should pursue it as a path. Yeah, this is something that I think is good to review. This is something that CEO had told me the other day, which was like, hey, I think this is a good plan. Do you think this is fine to go down this path? I'm not sure if it's worth writing another set of notes as I read my notes. I guess you write in JavaScript? Yeah, I do write in JavaScript. Okay, clever trick is to make it so you don't have to keep track of the entire path that you've traversed so far, is to mark the node as visited just before you continue the search, then mark it as unvisited right after. Then revert it. Actually, they negated this. Yeah. Okay. Be positive. I think of interview rounds sort of like tournament games, or if you get too dejected at the beginning, it'll affect your performance later. Keep trying. There are many times where it seems like you've exhausted all avenues. When that happens, try to think of your general techniques, compare to another one, simplify, try a different approach. Stick to what you practiced. This is really important. For me personally, if I see a problem structure that may involve recursion and I can't get the solution, then I usually need to spend longer on the base case to observe some property that will let me break the problem down. A good example of this is this problem. What is this problem? Oh, yeah. God, this problem. The distributing points problem. So the way that this worked is that you essentially have to consider that every individual node and not necessarily the path for how you'd move coins. So the goal of this problem was you have 3 coins on this node. You have to distribute a coin to neighboring nodes one at a time until all of the nodes have 1 coin. And you had to return the minimum number of steps you needed to do for that to work. So here, you move 1 here, you move 1 here, the answer is 2. And this, the way that it works is you have to see that 0 is 1 away from where it's supposed to be. So this will require 1 step to get here. This will require 1 step to get here. So those steps come from here. But the solution is, yeah, it's a little tricky with this. Any node ends up getting, yeah, this. Crazy. You had a couple interviews at AWS, and honestly, it's a strange process. Seems like you nail it and then nothing. When you mean and then nothing, what happened? Like you were doing phone screens and then they just stopped getting back to you? Over prep for 3M? Was 3M? Oh, a company? Yeah. Yeah, I think this is why a balance is good. Maybe I should write this for a mental state. Try to get some variety in your practice. Doing the code for days on end is demoralizing, even if you're making progress. Oh, 3 months. Oh, yeah, that's true. It also happens to be that 3M is the name of a company, so I wasn't sure. Mostly cloud security. I see. Yeah. Got on site and no real feedback. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I think this part about no real feedback is really a shame because most interview loops that I've done or that I'm part of are like 5 hours long. For you to spend 5 hours for a company and not get anything out of it, not even feedback to say, hey, look, you did these three things really well, but then these two, there were some flaws, and here's how you can improve. If they did that and spent the extra half hour, an hour, and I guess open themselves up to some legal liability, then that would be helpful for the candidate. Any tips on how to prepare for your first interview or job as a web developer, JavaScript backend stuff? A lot of my tips are what we're reading through right now, and so I don't know if there's anything specific I would add to this, but yeah, they're in the notes here. Yeah, they don't give feedback because of liability reasons. It's a shame that that's the case. When I go to an amusement park, you well, actually, I guess not an amusement park. I don't know. If I sign up for a gym, the gym says, "Hey, you recognize that what you're doing here, you might hurt yourself, and you're going to sign this waiver so that if you drop a weight on your foot, you're not going to sue us." Why is it that a company can't just be like, "Hey, why don't you sign this waiver that you're not going to sue us if you agree to get feedback?" Like, is that allowed? I don't know. Presumably, they decide it's just not worth the effort to even do that. Yeah. Yeah, the memories of a past world. No more amusement parks, no more chips. Okay, so let's see. Iterators and generators, or even just a functional approach, can help you minimize off by one errors due to how you encapsulate the iteration. When people in chat would share their solutions, sometimes they approach many problems from an iterator generator perspective. For example, Rax wrote the following code for this. This I should probably change to be a little more JavaScripty. Oh, Fresh, welcome back. Thanks for sharing the tier 3 sub. That's the last one you can do. I don't know if you saw, but subs are done. Try to build a class action alleging discrimination. Yeah, which is why I was thinking about the waiver, where you basically say like, you can't sue us for this. I mean, even at a gym, like I said, if I drop a weight on my foot, they'd probably be like, all right, well, that's clearly your fault. But then again, if a machine like a cord snaps or something and weights fall and I hurt myself, that probably still is the gym's fault and you probably still can sue them. So this is where like, I don't know enough about this to say. But regardless of the reasons why, it's still a sucky thing that it can't happen. Even if the reasons make total sense. it still it still feels bad that you can spend 5 hours and then just not get anything out of it. Sign a lot of rights away. Hey, Goody. Two employers as it is, so no, that wouldn't be great. As is high level employees at companies have gag orders baked into their contracts. Huh. Yeah. Yeah. Still a shame. Okay, so let's see here. We have this has next. I think this is fine. Not this, not next, not done. Yeah, okay. I think that's okay. So naive approach is to iterate over both strings, see if the needle appears at the position in the haystack. There's some common improvements that are probably worth being aware of without necessarily knowing how to implement them. KMP, Rabbin Carp works by reusing information about partially matched characters. And Rabbin Carp works by computing a rolling hash that's quick, turning a string into a number representation, and then only checking equality if the hashes are equal. Okay. I kind of want to take a look at this really fast. Thank you, Sisek. I appreciate it. What is a frame? Oh, it's literally just the substring. Yeah. Okay. This really isn't too crazy. Yeah. Write this down. It's really not too hard to understand. It's really not too bad to understand. I'll say it that way. That doesn't sound condescending at all. This is a general approach to a problem. Ensure that you understand the problem and ask questions. If examples are given, make sure they make sense to you. It's easy to miss constraints and then solve a completely different problem. Completely come up with the algorithm first. Weigh the trade-offs. Think out loud. Test the algorithm on any examples. Treat your code like someone else wrote it. Yeah, this was in one of the Google prep videos that they said, like, actually step through everything. Don't just assume, oh, this is what I meant, so this must be what I wrote. Does the choice for the interview, is it determined by the company to be that's going to be interviewing you? It can be for sure. So at the companies that I'm talking about, Amazon and Google, I asked, is JavaScript okay? And they both said yes. So I didn't even think, oh yeah, I'll look into something else. I just said, okay, cool, we're using JavaScript then. So at some other companies, they might be like, look, this job is for C sharp, so you should interview in C sharp. Aren't interviews more about that person and how they'd fit in a team, less about pure algorithms, or more about the frameworks and tools that they know well? At the companies I'm going to be interviewing for, they are very much like an academic process. And so you will have typically like 40% will be coding or design. Well, not coding or design. I guess coding, algorithms, data structures. And then typically like 30% might be system design, and then something like 30% might be behavioral questions. And so this is kind of what you're talking about. This is what I spent a lot of time on yesterday in coming up with these stories. And I'd spent time the day before too. So I spent a total of maybe 6 hours on behavioral stuff so far. Actually, a tiny bit longer. But I'd say a solid 6 hours on this. And I came up with a bunch of things that I thought would be good stories to talk about here. Your thoughts on Go for data structures and algorithms? I think whatever language you're comfortable in and that the company's fine with you using, you should use. So if you like Go, if you like Python, if you like Java, I think they're all more or less the same. I feel for writing interview code, because interview code is almost always less than 10 lines, and the language that you choose, like sure maybe you can cut off a couple of lines, but you're not talking about a huge difference between like 6 and 8 lines. Now in the real world, if you wrote something in like 1,000 lines versus 600, that can be the same percent, but it's very different than when it's 400 lines of code. That's way less to maintain. But I don't think it matters for an interview. No, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever the company's comfortable with. Okay, try to come up with edge cases, test it there. I wrote test it there. I wonder what I meant. I'm just saying test them. Work out any last questions in the algorithm step rather than in code. Only after all of that should you move to code. Yeah. Am I interviewing for a senior position? Yeah. Yeah. Well, the writing a book out of my notes, this is one of the steps I rarely do, which is to go through all of a particular note and see what makes sense and what doesn't and fix some tiny mistakes along the way. With that said, I don't think these notes will be too helpful for other people. And I'm reviewing them so that I can make sure that this is still in my memory for the next few days. Trying to get out of your dead end job by learning programming. If I have to compete with people like you, I'm screwed. Don't look at things that way. And also remember that pretty much anyone who's going to be going through the interview process, it's not like they can apply to every single company. And even if they can, then they're probably not going to get interviews at every single company. So even if you were competing with some of the best people in the world, they might not pick the same companies as you, or they might not have the same network as you. There are a lot of different reasons. What am I applying for? I'm applying for on Amazon. It's the workspaces team. And on Google, it's just being an employee. They don't really differentiate in the hiring process because it's the same application process, which I think for a big company, I think that makes the most sense to me. Actually, I just remembered I had emailed Microsoft. And what team? What was I going to write down? Oh, yeah. Contact Microsoft. Thanks, Joe Ross. Yeah. Heard some terrible things about Amazon work culture. Yeah, I think probably I've heard more bad things about Amazon than I've heard about other companies. And yet I always say the same thing about this. Every big company, every big company is going to have good teams and they're going to have bad teams. There's going to be a team where it's just a dream to work on. Everyone's super nice. There's going to be a team where everyone's worked to the bone and there's like a terrible leader. You're just bound to get that. It's just a numbers game, I feel. And some of these companies are so big. Like, I don't know how many engineers Amazon has. Amazon engineer count? Wonder if there's a way to. Yeah, there's probably some stats online, and this is just a bad search. I know Amazon as a whole has tons of employees, but how many of them are engineers? And I'm guessing that number is in the tens of thousands. So, yeah, I think you could say on average teams are going to be bad, but that doesn't mean that there won't be good teams. Hey, Tommy, how's it going? Thanks, Max. Also doing new stuff from the ground up. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it works on Amazon's game development team. Yeah, and at least from what I understand, the game development team is very new. It's from the last, I think, like 7 years. Whereas Amazon, of course, goes back to I think the 90s. Oh, I don't know how many people are still around from the 90s. That Jeff guy is. Okay. So yeah. So my whole point in this section was basically the code comes last, and the code should be possibly the easiest part if you wrote your algorithm well. All right, so stacks, sometimes you just need the concept of pushing and popping without actually storing any data, in which case you can use a counter. For example, to see if a string has matching left and right parentheses, you can just count num unclosed left parens rather than make a stack with their indices. Yeah. We're going to write a blog post on interview prep. I have been greatly debating this internally because there are a bunch of options here. A blog post, a course. Did I write OneNote? Deactivate LinkedIn, update hire, start keeping a note when I did my job, tweet. So dropping partnership contract. I'm gonna cancel this. Get rid of Streamlabs donations already done. Cancel Patreon's already done. I don't need to do that stuff. Update FAQ, get address, update Udemy question. Oh, this isn't. Did I already do this? I don't think this had to do with getting a job. Hang on, let me take a look at that. Yeah, yeah. I looked at Udemy the other day because I got an email and it said you've made 2 sales since I put this on there, which I don't know. I guess it's better than nothing, but it's like $10, so probably not super worthwhile. But yeah, there was something else I wanted to write here that you guys just reminded me of. What was I going to write? Oh yeah, blog post. So do a blog post on interview prep, or maybe even make a course. Making a course, I don't think is a good idea. I think I'd have to put a lot of time into that. I don't think I'm enough of an expert. Drop a course to for your catalog. I was talking about this stuff with. We had the whole ego conversation yesterday. And I was talking to my wife about just Adam Learns and how it is as a product idea. And so I think it has promise, and I think that I will need to build it out. But the only way that I'll be able to do that is while I'm working at another job. So I don't know how that's going to work. The courses that I created took so long to make. So long. And yeah, like the Godot course, I think was something like 60 or 70 hours of just the video work itself, and that didn't count the time spent learning. just writing those scripts took a very long time. So what I'm thinking is, let's say I got it down to 40 hours. How do you slot in 40 hours with a full-time job? Like maybe you do 10 to 15 hours per week, in which case it's going to take you 3 to 4 weeks. But then by spending only so many days each week, maybe this expands the number of hours, because now you need to refresh your memory on like, wait, what did I do last time? Maybe the quality suffers a bit. So I'm not sure how that's going to work. It is $10 I didn't have before, but it was also, it took time to put the course online. So at this point, I would still consider it kind of a loss of money to even have targeted Udemy. Hey, Revrox. Maybe produce specialized courses on hard topics and target professionals. Yeah, I need to definitely get better at the business and marketing side of things. And I'll need to be careful about what courses I do too. Because Adam Learns was partially like, hey, what do I want to do? And yeah, the courses I did are not really popular topics. The development efficiency one is doing pretty well though. In fact, actually, that got another review yesterday, or not yesterday. I don't know when, but yeah, I thought this was really nice. So now we have the most reviews on this one. Yeah, go Deke. And I didn't even do the projects for students. I did everything else, just not that. Sorry, you always want to simplify binary tree problems to a base case and then run a solution recursively. At the very least, start by seeing if there's such a solution. Yep. If you ever find yourself wanting to keep track of a path, think of whether you could store something about the path instead. For example, if you want to make sure that a node is the largest of all the nodes at the path leading into it, you only need to track the largest value you've seen so far. Yeah. Anytime you get a question involving zeros and ones, can you treat them as numbers? Is there any clever bit masking you can do? Yeah. Yeah, some of these are pretty general tips. And I still, like, if I wrote a blog post, I don't know if it'd be better than just sharing this note. Hey, Hideo. Learn to sell yourself a lot if you don't want to get fired. This is what I've heard of Netflix, actually, is that they're not afraid to fire people. Because most big companies that I've heard stories about, I hear about a bad employee that continues to work there for another year or two. What's that notebook? Yeah, this is my OneNote that I'm using. Yeah, Hideo, please send it in an email. Stop trying to type in chat. Please email all of us. So backtracking is essentially a pre-order traversal through a tree, and you don't necessarily need to construct the tree, just visualize how it would be constructed. Here's an example from Mbrax. I think saying it as a pre-order traversal is a little bit weird. I think, yeah, I think this is weird because, well, I don't know. I'll just leave it there, I guess. Hey, Urban Commando, how's your interview process going? Oh, they give you 3 months pay if they fire you? Really? Wow, I didn't know that. After the stack rank decimation system, just soften. Fire 10% of the workforce periodically. Yeah, it always kind of makes me wonder if it leads to some dysfunction, is it better to keep underperforming employees? Oh, you found a job 3 weeks ago. Nice, 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 nice. Congrats. And yeah, awesome. So you're free from the curse of interview prep. You're free from this wretched existence. Okay, great code. This is a number system that only changes one binary bit for each number that we count up. The way you can form this is to write out all binary numbers, then figure out how many bits change. Wait. So let me see this, because I know that that's how you're supposed to do this, but I don't remember exactly how this works. So you write out all binary numbers, every single one of them to infinity. All right, we're gonna just do this. So this is, we're supposed to write which, how many bits changed. So 1 bit changed from the prior one, 2 bits changed, 1 bit changed, 3 bits changed. Okay, this is pretty clever. Yeah, this works. So then you use these to index by least significant bit over here. So here we see 1 bit change. So in order to make the gray code, we say we turn on the first bit. Then we say 2 bits changed. So now we toggle the second bit. Then we say that 1 bit changed, so we do this. Then we say that 3 bits changed, so we do this. So gray code is a way of only having one number change in the binary representation every time. And then if we wrote this out as decimal, it'd be 0, 1, 3, 2, 6. And that's how you formed gray code. So yeah, crazy. Raimu actually told me about this process. Gray code itself is well known. I mean, Frank Gray came up with this, but yeah, crazy. We'll get some sheep on their teams. We can sacrifice them. Just put them on the pyre. Game programming, Unity, Unreal, with the real fun stuff. I'm glad to hear the studying made it easier. The bar will be lowered. I think that's more of a medium-term thing, though. I don't know if it's going to be a short-term thing. I have some friends who are actually, or well, I shouldn't say they're my friends necessarily. I guess they're acquaintances to me. They're my wife's friends, but one of them moved from the U.S. to Canada. Another one is thinking of moving from the U.S. to India, and a lot of this has to do with legislation now. So I find that to be a shame. I think the U.S. is losing a lot of talent that way. Now, granted, I only talked about 2 sets of people, but I bet this is happening on a larger scale. I just can't see it. What's a use case for gray code? Apparently, there are tons of use cases in electronics, and I can't tell you any of those. But this came up in a LeetCode problem, although I don't remember what at this point. I wonder if I've got it in my, let's go, temp interview prep LeetCode. RG Gray. No, I didn't write about gray code. Yeah. I don't remember which problem it was. Yeah. Using Lua for 3 months to make modifications for GTA 5. Goal is to become a software engineer, 16 now. Should I go and learn a real language, as some say, or just continue learning Lua, continue with Lua till college? Well, let me say this. College for you is likely only 1 or 2 years. So I think you should do what's most interesting to you for right now. And if it's Lua, yeah, stick with Lua. If it's a real language, which I wouldn't, I know what you mean by this. If it's a real language, I would say, yeah, you could try it out. The nice thing about programming, as you must have already seen by making mods for GTA or making scripts, I don't actually know how GTA works with this stuff, is that you can do it all from your computer by not spending any money. So if you want to try learning a different language, you could do that for free. My general advice on all of this stuff is here. There's a method to construct a table that makes it. Yeah. But what I think is that I'm going to remember at least this, as opposed to trying to remember the pseudocode. One of the other things actually that I want to write down. Let me write this. So today what we're going to do is go through notes and then go through this list as well and make sure overall tasks are done. And then extra work that I want to do is just like memorize the code to reverse a linked list in place. I feel like it's going to be important, and I've just never, it's always been something that's been tough for me to do. Yeah, a lot of people are going to be dropping their plan. Yeah. Like I said, it's a shame. I meant the prefix method. Let's see. 0. Counting the original list with the reversed list. For example, generating the n equals 3 list from the n equals 2 list. Yeah. I think if this even came up during an interview, which I'd be kind of surprised about, I want to at least know the overall idea here. But I don't think I'm gonna look at this too much more. The image on the right. Yeah. Do you have any notes on Blender? I haven't used Blender, no. Or if I have used Blender, I've used it for like 10 seconds. But Blender is one of the big things I wanted to learn. I think you can do quite a lot with it, and I think it'd be cool to have some experience, but yeah, we never got to that. So dynamic programming is all about finding subproblems. So the general technique that I've seen is to identify the pattern, then write simple code to match the pattern. For example, if you see that you can reuse the results from n over 2, you can compute results from 0 to n and not have to compute them again for any even numbers. So if you see that you can reuse the results from n over 2, then you can compute results from 0 to n. You can reuse the results from, if you see that you, how do I say this better? Is based on f of n divided by 2. There, that's cleaner, I think. Yeah. Yeah, the big idea is that one bit changes between each state, but I think figuring out how you form that is still kind of tough when you're just looking at it. How do I set up my OneNote like this? I use OneNote 2013 or 2016 now. So if your OneNote doesn't look like this, you probably have a different version. So people suggest. So I have a bunch of other notes on this. I wrote a bunch of notes on this here based on MIT lectures. And now let's go find those notes. Yeah. So copy, link to page. Where are these notes? Coding? Yeah, coding. In my coding notebook. Direct link here based on MIT lectures. I think it has some use in software engineering probably, but it's hard for me to say because the only time it came up for me was during LeetCode. So at the very least, it could show up in an interview. And to that end, it's like, well, anyway, I guess that doesn't really add anything to the conversation, what I'm saying. So what I decided with dynamic programming is I know enough about the theory of it to the point where if I get a problem that requires dynamic programming, I may be okay, but that I'm not going to practice it anymore because I think it would be too much of a time sink. All right, we need a way of uniquely identifying a subproblem with the fewest number of parameters. We also need a way of using a subproblem to result in another problem. Yeah, okay, all this makes sense. Yeah. Am I good with backtracking? I don't know what I'm good or bad at this point. And yeah, I'll probably do a little bit more LeetCode practice. Like yesterday, my wife and I went to the park. I brought Cracking the Coding interview, and I opened it up to the first of the technical questions. I read it and I did it, and then I was like, this is a terrible idea. Because I was at the park. What I realized I should have done is looked through all the solutions and just tried to take what I could from the solutions. But I didn't want to write out code in a notebook and then not know if it's going to work. And I thought it would be silly. So generating a range of numbers following a specific pattern. Best way is to figure out if you can generate the pattern directly. For example, if you want to generate A, B, C, B, A, B, 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 C, that's just counting in ternary. An easy way of generating the pattern is to generate all patterns and filter down to what you need. For example, I had a string like ABC where I wanted only AB, AC, and BC. I could generate all binary numbers and only accept the ones where 2 bits were on. Yeah, I guess so. Hold on, honey, just one more problem. It wasn't very long. I think this isn't the kind of book you just read through. It's the kind of book you work along with. Except for the first few chapters, you can just read through because they talk about things like negotiation and whatever else. So the first time I'd gone to the park, I read this for about an hour. Hey, Johnny. Clack, clack. It may be helpful to realize that any number XORed with itself is 0. As a result, if you had, for example, suppose you had an array of numbers where every number showed up exactly twice except for one number which showed up once. To find that single number, you could just XOR the entire list. So basically, let's try this too, because I don't want to make up a lie here. Let's say you had a list of numbers where, like I said, everything is a pair except for one number. In order to find that one number, you should be able to do this and just XOR them all. And yeah, you end up with 5. So yes, that does work. And the reason why is because X XORed with itself is equal to 0. So what you're really doing is X XORed with itself, XORed with Y, XORed with itself, XORed with Z, XORed with itself, XORed with some other number. So you'll always be left with this other number here. Did forget Johnny, but that's okay. Now, I do kind of find XOR-based interview questions to be really pedantic because I think almost every interview question where XORing was a technique you had to use was like a, I gotcha. So I think it's kind of silly, but it's not that it doesn't have uses. It's just I think it's bad for interviewing. All right, so binary trees, you can represent it with a one-dimensional array. To find a child of the current element, you'd multiply by 2 and add the offset based on whether you have a 0 or 1 indexed array. To find the parent, you do the reverse, subtract and then divide by 2. Yeah, so and I have a link for this here too. So if anyone's actually ever looking at these notes, they can just see this here. So you can see this tree structure formed. This is a little hard to tell from what you see here. It's especially hard when that happens. And it's anyway, so if we assign some numbers here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you can see that 1 points to 2 and 3, 2 points to 4 and 5, 3 points to 6 and 7. So the tree is roughly what you'd expect. The point of this is that when it's represented in an array like this, you only need the array indices, which is going to be all the nodes values minus 1. And you can figure out from any index what its children are going to be. So this is going to be 2n plus 1 and 2n plus 2. So if we're looking at just index 0 and we want to know what are the children, we do 2 times 0 plus 1, 2 times 0 plus 2. And sure enough, that's what we have. And we can reverse that as well. We can subtract 1 and then divide by 2. We can subtract 2 and then divide by 2. So that's all this note was supposed to say here. And let's see, heaps are sometimes implemented as a binary tree. So if we look at the heap data structure, there's the time complexity. And the thing that I try to remember from this is that it's only deletion that's going to be log n with good heaps. So that's all I really plan on remembering. I think that's probably a good idea. Depending on how heaps are implemented, I should put this down here. Depending on how heaps are implemented, every operation is O of n. Actually, that's not true. It's O of 1. Except for delete min, which is always O of log n. Yep. Lentil Stew Dragon, did you remove the debao from your name? When did that happen? Or did I already comment on this? What do those kind of questions tell the company? I just don't get it. And I did a lot of technical interviews on both sides of the table. So the theory behind it, and I don't agree with the theory really, is that it's a purposely academic test to see if you know the fundamentals. Because if you don't know the fundamentals, then you can't derive very much from them. But like I said, I don't really agree with that. But I think that's generally how it's viewed. I think that it is very, very challenging to know whether the person you're interviewing will actually do well on the job for coding, for software engineering, I should say. So I find a lot of this process to be really kind of bad. Even the behavioral questions, it's possible that I'm like the worst person in the world to work with. But a lot of the prep that I was doing yesterday, these questions of like, oh, hey, what's a time when you navigated a difficult problem? It's like I've had tons of those and I don't remember any of them. And so coming up with these stories yesterday was like, yeah, I was joking that Codephobia and chat knew more about what I've done with my work than I know about my own work. And thank goodness I was doing this on stream because, yeah, I forget about this stuff. And some of these things, I mean, look at this. Like, okay, I had to redesign the game. I literally I wrote out a 71-page document about like, hey, let's redesign this the right way. Let's consider every single possibility. And I started with the very basics of like, why would you even want automation in a game? And I'm not kidding. If you look at this scroll bar over here, you'll see it'll just load in all the pages that I did. You can scroll to any random point and see whatever stupid garbage I wrote out here. But like, this is how I approach problems normally. Now, would I remember this after like 2 months of doing this? Yeah, probably. What about 2 years after doing it? Nope, just totally gone from my memory. So I don't remember my own working patterns. And so how do I even tell an interviewer that? And that's why the prep is important. But if another person can do a better job at spinning something that maybe isn't very impressive into something that sounds impressive, I don't know. I'm a little disenfranchised from this whole process. I think that's generally how I feel right now. So I kind of take exception to almost all of it at this point. But I don't have a better solution right now. I think this would be super cool to try to tackle a problem like this, though. Try to come up with a style of interviewing that most accurately aligns with how someone will do on the job. That'd be really crazy to do. See if you care enough to play the interview game. You have to memorize random trivia and algorithms. I think that's what it's become. I don't know if that was the point of it though. Like this is what metagaming is all about, right? You're playing a game and an RPG, and there are some stats like strength, dexterity, vitality, and energy, or something like that. And you're like, oh, if I just put every single point in dexterity, monsters can't hit me anymore. It's like that wasn't really how the game was supposed to be played, right? But that's how people treat these things now, and they min max and whatever else. Well, it's the same thing with this. This has a meta game around it, the interview process. And it's, oh, you practice for 50 hours? Well, then if I practice for 100 hours, I'll have a better shot at getting the job. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's probably true. But then what about how you do when you're on the job? Why not practice for 100 hours on that? It's so not simple. I had such interviews with US companies. I stood up and left it at the spot. Yeah. But that's the thing, Lentils too. At the end of the day, if you have to ask like, do I want to work for company X? And if yes, and if they do this process, then you have to do this process too. That's it. That's the bottom line. And your answer to this can totally be no. And that's totally fine too. But if you say, hey, I want to work for Google, Google has this interview process, then you can't say to Google, hey, would you mind doing something different for me? It just doesn't work that way. So for me, for at least whatever reason, I said, you know what? Yeah, company X, company Y, sure, I want to work for them. And those companies are like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and they do this process. So I have to do this process. Have you heard about active learning? I already seem to do a lot of it. That's why I'm reluctant to mention it, but it's basically trying to recall. Ah, here it is. What's in your notes rather than passively reread to revise them. I don't think I've heard of this. I wanted to dive more into the learning process and see what I could apply. A friend of mine told me a story about, I'll just make this up. I don't remember the exact story. So it was something like there was a software engineer and they got really, really good at software engineering. And then they said, you know what? Let me try applying everything I learned on software engineering to something I'm really bad at. And they did something like, I don't know, karate or something. I'm just making this up. Something totally unrelated, completely different skills. And yet what you learn about learning can help you in both of these. And I guess they went on to do some like great stuff with karate or again, I don't know the exact story. So what I'm wondering about is, can I genericize the learning process enough to be able to just go pick up arbitrary hobbies or academia And you probably can. I know there's been some books written about this, but I need to try them out for myself, I guess. One principle of active recall is that fewer clues and prompts you need in order to bring back the memories to mind, the better. Yeah. Yeah. I look at my own memory as being this set of things that I actually want to remember and a set of things I don't want to remember. So things I don't want to remember are things um like easy to look up things. So let's say we're talking about, hey, how do you sort a list in Python? Like I don't care. I think it's a sorted function. I've probably used it enough times where it's this, but if it wasn't this, I don't need it in my memory. Like, that does not need to exist there. But then there are lots of things that I do want to know about that would help me, and having to look them up every time would be rough. Like, can I eat this fruit or is it poisonous? Like things like that are probably pretty important. So uh, I feel like the interview process is a whole lot of like all this stuff I don't want in my memory needs to take space there, and that's why we're reviewing notes today. It's geek screening. I think create a culture where UI design is de-emphasized. Yeah, yeah, geek screening. I think these kinds of interviews do favor people who have the time to spend, but then again, I think a lot of interview styles favor people who have time to spend. If you think about it, any sort of take home test, any portfolio based interview, these algo and data structure interviews, pretty much anything that's not like, hey, we're going to give you an hour and we're going to judge you just in that hour of time, is, hey, do you have the time to give to our interview process? People will try to game that process too. Yeah, I think this is a fact of life, and gaming can sometimes mean cheating, and people are willing to go to that length as well. So you could have a process that's somehow bulletproof except for cheating, and now someone comes in and they've got like a tiny device in their ear and someone's reading them answers. Like that kind of gaming, I think, is that has very different solutions, right? But yeah, there's probably a better interview process. That's my feeling. It's like saying that there's probably not going to be a proof for P equals NP. But I don't have anything more, anything deep enough to say other than that. How's it going with the job interviews so far? They haven't really happened yet. There were a lot originally in the process when I was looking at startups and everything, and I talked to companies, but I didn't really know what I wanted. I still feel like I don't really totally know what I want. But the job interviews are going to be Friday and Monday for me. So 3 days from now, 6 days from now. Well, the last time you disagree with your boss? Can't remember a time. So these questions, I think they just require prep because, yeah, if you can't even think of a time, you won't even have a story, and then it's not really gonna be helpful if you're like, I never had a disagreement with my boss. I guess they might ask a different question. Do one thing and do it well should apply to other ideas. Yeah. If I got both Amazon and Google, what would I pick? I'd pick Google. Not to criticize everybody. Oh no, I definitely didn't misunderstand. Let's do it. I've seen the sentiment that you've given a decent amount, and I don't take offense or anything. But a lot of people ask like, why even do this process? And the answer is incredibly simple. It's if you want to work for one of these companies and they have the process, that's why you'd want to do it. So I agree. If there were a lot of companies I wanted to work for, and I could save myself 120 hours by just not doing this process, I think that would be ideal. Do you think as a person gets older, it becomes harder to learn how to code? I've always wondered about this, but I don't actually have any evidence to support that this is the case. So I don't think so. And why OneNote? The only other thing I tried was Evernote, and I struggled with a couple of very, very severe bugs in Evernote that made me never want to use it again. So now it's called Nevernote. But yeah, ever since then, I have every single note I've ever taken for the last like 8 years in OneNote. So switching at this point is not just is the new software better, but also can I migrate all of my notes there, search them as well, format things, not lose links, etc. There's a lot to it. Have you considered promotion opportunities and mechanisms too when picking the companies? No, I haven't. Yeah, that part doesn't matter to me right now. I think what's most important is just I think my general goal is figure out a new routine. So I'd love to loop back to Adam Learns, and I'd love to have time to do this still. And so I need some routine where I can work on this. That's what I think, but I'm not positive. And the new routine doesn't have to include that. I'd prefer portfolio-based process. Yeah. I think the people who have good portfolios will probably prefer this. Like, I would prefer this too. But I still don't think it's good overall because there are a lot of people who can't code in their free time. And I don't think the process should be biased towards certain people, but all processes will have bias when it comes to these interviews. Do I have my resume online? No. I haven't showed that. The closest thing I have is this. That's not my resume though. That's my portfolio. Yeah, I've heard good things about Notion, but like I said, at this point, I can't really switch to anything because I'm like locked into OneNote. I also don't really have a problem with OneNote. I don't feel like it's a ball and chain. Once you said you already work for Microsoft, shouldn't it be easier to go back there since they know you already? You would think, but man, Microsoft has actually been the hardest company to get in touch with. I worked there for 3.5 years, and I know tons of people who still work there, so I got a referral, and I applied through that referral. I got no contact from Microsoft for like a month and a half, and then the referral went in and messaged a bunch of the hiring managers saying like, "Hey, did you see this person's resume?" And then one of those people reached out to me, and that's what led to the conversations last week. But I don't think the team was a good fit. And then that's it. Now I'm just thrown back into the void of I have no contacts who. I don't. I, I think it's kind of silly. Have I done this type of interview before? Yeah, I have. A lot of work is NDA'd and they want to see a portfolio. Yeah, this is part of that bias, right? If you work for a company, chances are you can't just say, "Oh, here's a code snippet. Here's the project I worked on." Chances are there's some part of that that's private, and so you can't just include that in your portfolio. But that's where you're spending years of your time. Most of them are a lot less impressive than you'd expect. People who learn to code on their own generally don't learn how to write code that you want to maintain. Yeah, yeah. And what was my position at Microsoft? I was a software development engineer and test on Windows security. Okay, let's get back to reading through some of these notes. Okay, binary search trees can be converted to a sorted array with an in-order traversal. This is sometimes helpful for finding answers, but you could also potentially avoid allocating space for an array by operating on numbers as you do the traversal. Yeah, these are good little tips to keep in mind. There's like, if you think of all interview questions as being a set of, let's say, 5,000 questions, there's going to be 2 or 3 where this might help. So it's probably good to just read. Why did I leave Microsoft? I hated the job. I hated it. I thought Microsoft was a great company, but I was an SDET, I was on Windows, and I was on Windows security. I didn't like any part of this stuff, but I especially didn't like this. This was the biggest thing I didn't like. So an SDET is a software development engineer in test, and it was this part I didn't like. I felt that there was no ownership over what I was doing, and I just never liked the job. So it was just a bad fit. I didn't have enough confidence to say I should move somewhere else. I think I tried at one point, but it was mostly floundering at that point. But even then, even when I was like, I need to leave this place, I recognized that there are a lot of good things about working here. And like I said, I still have lots of friends who work there. And every once in a while, we'll go, whatever, play a game in one of the buildings. And I'm like, man, these buildings are nice. They got a lot of like nice perks, a lot of good stuff. What does that mean? Is it the same as a test engineer? So what it means, Microsoft still has what they call software development engineers, SDEs, which some places call SWs or whatever. Anyway, engineers, and the T just meant that you were focusing on test automation, test code. So it's not the same as something like QA, where you'd have like a large portion of manual testing, and also you wouldn't be involved in the development process. This was like you're in the development process, you're helping write specs, you're kind of testing even right from the spec level. of, hey, you got a document about how you plan on doing this, but wait, there's going to be a problem when you integrate with this component. Have you thought about the security here? Have you, I don't know, all of that stuff was part of what an SDET would do. And the role has largely been done away with. Okay. Am I interested in front end or back end? Just back end, pretty much. Type of work am I expecting to do? Yeah, back end work. Front end for me is something that if I ever have to do professionally, I think I would dislike it. But if I ever have to do it as like, let's say I had to make a tool and the target was developers and someone else came up with the design for it, I'd be like, yeah, this is fine. I don't mind doing it. What are the plans for Twitch and streaming during the next job? It'll probably die down by like 90 to 95%. How old am I now? I've got an answer for you, but it's not the answer you're looking for. Still working toward my goal to get a software engineer position at one of the big tech companies. I don't think it necessarily becomes harder and harder. I had a friend who, how old was he? Let me think about this. I think he was 33 years old, and he said he applied to Microsoft 3 times before making it. And he was one of the best engineers I ever worked with. So like he's I guess I have a list of like top 3 engineers that I've worked with, and this guy was in the top 2 because he had a really good personality as well. He's one of the people in the top 3 was a really good engineer but had a bad personality. Anyway, so what my point here is that it might take some attempts, but then again, there was this concept that I heard where there's the perfect team and there's the perfect anti-team when it comes to interviewing. You could be probably a terrible candidate, and there's probably a set of 5 people out there who will hire you. And you could be the best candidate, and there's probably a team of 5 people out there who would not hire you. And this is kind of what I think about when it comes to like hard games. If you think about Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, you could take the most idiot player, and there's probably some ordering of their deck and the opponent's deck such that they'll win the game. And it's just like some 1 in a 10 to the trillionth power kind of odds that it happens, but it can happen, and then they just play on autopilot and they win. And I think that can kind of happen with interviewing too. And in both cases, kind of skill should even out the differences that you might get there, but they exist. Don't sell out, follow your dreams. I mean, I need money to follow my dreams. Interesting to know what others pick up on as being a really good engineer. For me, I considered it as what was important to me at the time, which is largely coding. So there's design behind the coding. There's like rapidity of ideation, I guess. And there's the coding itself, and then there's just like the general knowledge that you have. And then, like I said, personality comes into this as well. Like, are they easy to work with? Yeah. Hey, Codadon, welcome back. Okay. What's rapidity of ideation? I just mean the speed at which you come up with ideas for things. So your problem solving speed or your problem solving efficiency. Why did my windows? Oh, my window is open. I'm just shouting the world at it. Oh man. My neighbors are gonna hate me. Ah, I feel bad about that. I never stream with my window open unless I've got the AC on. Uh, this is like super cringy. Uh, it was too hot in here, so I had it wide open last night, but I didn't have the AC on. I just left it open. Yeah, nothing wrong with shouting at the world like a crazy person. Darn it. It's so embarrassing. I'm like reading my notes and whatever. Now, can you try it again after 6 months? I don't know what their cooldown period is, but usually for most companies, it's somewhere between 6 to 12 months. So you can always ask. Am I studying just for Amazon? It's Amazon, Google, and if Microsoft ever gets back to me, then Microsoft as well. Good practice of public speaking. Oh man, I feel really bad about that. And I was like, I can hear my neighbors very clearly right now, which means they could hear me even clearer because I'm basically shouting when I'm in my room. And thank you, Shaz. Now I have to move. I know. It's like when you find a spider in your house. It's time to burn it down. Let's go to the next one and hope there's no spider there. All right. Add a new element to a heap backed by a tree. You typically sift the element up or down. For example, in a max heap, the root of any subtree is always greater than its children. To add a number, you would add it to the first empty space in the tree and then sift it upward until it's less than the parent. Yeah, this is one of those things where it's like, yeah, obviously it has to work this way, but it's so easy to forget. So let me draw out what I'm talking about here. The property of a max heap. Actually, let's look at a max heap that we have. Yeah. So here is a max heap, which this is an SVG, so I can't just resize it. The topmost element's always going to be the biggest element in the entire heap, and then every element beneath is going to be less than it. So 19, every single thing less than this will appear beneath it. Everything greater than it has to appear above it or to the side of it. So that's just the properties of a heap, right? So when you go to add another number, the way you do it is you add it to just the first empty space. So like here underneath the 3, and then you just compare with the 3. If you're adding the number, let's say 30, you say, okay, 30 is greater than 3, so swap the 2. Okay, 30 is greater than 19, so swap the 2. 30 is not greater than 100, so you're done. Now you've got your heap. And then there's a lot of, that's the very basics. You could balance your heap. There's a whole lot of other implementation details, but I think this is really important to know. Now they know not to mess with the crazy guy next door. Oh man, I really, really don't like how that felt to realize my window is open. It's a very hard thing to explain because it's not like you're on a phone call with your friend and you're like, what did I say in that conversation? This is like there's some psycho person up there just babbling about computer science nonstop. He hasn't stopped talking for the last hour. He just keeps talking about heaps and trees. Ever consider moving some other place? Pretty sure having a position of working at Microsoft allows you to get hired without going through interviews. You mean like a different country? No, I haven't thought of moving to a different country. Not for a while, at least. But a different state within the U.S. Like I'd be open to that. I am married, so it's not like it's just my decision, and my wife and I are really happy here. So I do like where we live, and I like a lot of parts about where we live. So it's like the weather is nice. I like our actual city that we're in. So moving would probably not really be in the picture for a while, I think. So yeah, let me see. Links below for other sizes. Links below what? I don't remember. Oh, this. Oh. Oh yeah. Actually, didn't realize you could do that. Because what I do is this. I have an extension that lets me resize images, but they have to be image tags. And this is in an image tag, I'm guessing. Even though it's an SVG, yeah. Yeah, so when I load it as just an SVG, I can't do that anymore. And I didn't know that was a thing. Interesting. What to do? It's just practice. Yeah. A heap is different from a binary tree. So this is where the terminology of everything gets to be pretty important. So a binary tree literally just means that you can have up to 2 children. That's the property. So this is a binary tree, this is a binary tree, this is a binary tree. And that's it, because that's the one property of binary trees. It can have up to 2 children. Then there's a concept of a full tree, a complete tree, and then heaps add this property of your topmost element is always going to either be your minimum or your maximum element, and then typically all subtrees follow that same pattern. So if you have the number 19 here, you can have 8 here, but you can't have something like 82 over here. unless this is a minimum heap, in which case that's fine, I guess. Or wait, no, that wouldn't be, because this number's between these two. Yeah. So then 8 would have been at the top, or 82 would have been at the top. Hope I can get an OA. What's OA? HQ is near me. I really want to move to West Coast. Are these notes available? Yeah, just type the notes command. Yep. He just never stops talking. I don't think these problems will show anything about the candidate. Yeah, and I mean, I generally agree. But like I said earlier, if you want a job at a company that does this process, then you have to do the process. And if you don't want a job at a company, then you can totally ignore the process. At one of these companies, I mean. And thanks, NSO, for linking that in. When your neighbor's perfectly understanding, you just told them, yeah, I make content for the internet. That's why I need to talk a lot. Yeah, but I don't know who. Okay, so I have enough neighbors where all I heard was someone's voice out there, right? I don't know who that is. And so I'd have to like figure out where they live, which is super weird, and then be like, oh, hey, by the way, that psychobabble you heard, that's just me being on the internet streaming. They'd be like, okay. It's just really silly. How does solving these problems help solving a bug? For example, the database is not returning the correct data. My question really is, how does it help companies find the right person? So this is a very opinionated process. Like I said, this is an academic pursuit right now, talking about algorithms and data structures. It's not like everyone on their job uses algorithms and data structures for coding, just not usually to this level. So when you're given a task like, hey, we need to find like person matching order, and you have an order ID or something like that, this is an algorithm. Whatever you're writing in this function is an algorithm. It's probably not something you're strongly considering like, what's the time complexity of this? What's the extra space that I'm using? So the way you go about it in interviews is very academic. Also, data structures, again, it's pretty much impossible to write any meaningful code without somehow using an array or a dictionary or a tree or something, right? But typically you're not making like your own min heap from scratch. If you need a heap, you're using someone else's. If you need a queue, you're probably using someone else's. So that's where these things do come into play. It's just not exactly in the way that the interviews talk about them. And that's why I say it's an opinionated process. They just leave a brown bag on their front step and there's just an index card in it. Is something used profoundly in the industry? Yes. Like I said, every single code every program you ever write, pretty much, it's almost impossible to avoid algorithms and data structures. I guess the one way you could avoid data structures is if you somehow just use like Booleans and numbers and you wrote some like really simple program. But again, they're not going to be to this, you're not going to use them at the level you're using them in interviews. The typical data structure questions are things like reverse a linked list. If you ever had to do this in person, like in a real situation, you'd probably have a linked list class and you'd call reverse on it. And cool, that's it. That's all you need to know. You wouldn't need to know how this works or what's the time complexity or something. You could pretty much trust that if they gave you a function, it's going to be super fast. And maybe they even give you a couple ways. Maybe they say like reverse fast and reverse like low memory or something. And yeah, then that's it. You just decide what you need for your situation and you're done. And that's why I'm saying, like, you can't avoid algorithms, you can't avoid data structures, but you can avoid the particulars of them. And you almost always will in the real world because you'll use other people's libraries. When I needed to code, let me see if I can find this. When I needed to code this is what I use for matchmaking in Botland. It's a system called Glicko. And you guys might have heard of Elo and these other ranking systems. You can see the math here. This is not like insanely complex math. I know it looks like it could be tough, but I didn't write this out myself. I went and did a search for a library that did this, and I found one, and I used it, and that was it. So I understand the concepts behind Glicko, but I never did this math myself. And it's the same thing with data structures. You should understand all the concepts, but you're probably never going to write one for your job unless you have very specific needs. And when I say write one, I mean like you're not going to write your own queue. You're not going to write your own linked list. Just use existing stuff out there. And by the way, this is why people take exception to this, because it's like I've been a software engineer for long enough. I know what real world engineering looks like. I've done a lot of projects on my own, and I know that it doesn't look like the interview process. But you can't change companies. Can I see some of the games you made? Yeah, sure. And hey, Priven. Okay, so to find the first empty space depends on how you stored your heap in memory. If it's an array or vector, just add the element to the end and sift it upward. If it's a tree stored with tree nodes, then you'd BFS through the tree to find the first node missing a left child or right child in that order. Yeah, yeah. This is actually really helpful. These notes, I'm glad I took those. Depending on how heaps are implemented, every operation can be over one. Yeah, I just wrote that one today. Actually, you can tell them one no because it says August 11th. You just right click anything and find out when you wrote it. See ya, Jupiter. Finding the most frequent element in an array without sorting. Suppose you have an array with 10 elements and you want to find the most frequent one without sorting, which would be O of n log n. You could make an array of arrays to represent the most frequent element. This outer array would have to be at least as long as the source, since the maximum frequency is the length of the array. Then you append to the inner array based on the frequency that you find. Once finished, you just find the last filled frequency bucket. Now you have the most frequent elements. See the reference link, for example? So hold your horses here. Make an array of arrays to represent the most frequent element. Outer array would have to be at least as long as a source array. So I must be removing things from these buckets as I go. Oh, wait. I shouldn't have deleted this. See the reference link for an example, and then here's something that I wrote. Let me take a look. Yeah, this is fine. I guess this is just to prevent you from having to iterate over everything and then find the largest bucket that you had. Okay. So you could count frequencies in a hash map and then bucketize the hash map by frequency into arrays. Arrays of arrays. Outer array would have to be, yeah. I think there's a better way of wording this. That way it's obvious what we're talking about first. Then you append to the inner array based on the frequency you find. Once finished, you just find the last filled frequency bucket. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, just use a map, but then, I mean, then you still need to iterate over the map to find your highest frequency. And this idea was a way of doing it in such a way that you sort by frequency. I guess I should also narrow this down a bit more because this was taking the top K elements. That's why this is important. So finding the top K most frequent elements in an array without sorting. Yeah, there we go. That's what I think was missing from this. Because otherwise, yeah, it's just figure out the frequency and find the one with the top frequency. Yeah. Does cracking the coding interview book cover everything one would need to know? I haven't looked through this in a while. I know I've been talking about this, but the last time I really looked through this was probably like 2014. So I don't remember. You think a company asks implementations of data structures like AVL or red black tree? Have you prepared for these? I don't think a red black tree is ever something that would get asked in an interview because I think its implementation is not something you typically do in like 30 minutes. And also, since it's pretty straightforward, I don't know if there are any other like questions that they'd ask as a follow up. So, would they ask about it? Like they could, but I think generally, I think everything I've been seeing lately has been more about algorithms than data structures. But I guess it also depends on the seniority of the position you're applying to. Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going. So converting recursion to an iterative approach, just use a stack and a while loop in place of the programming language's stack that gets used when you call a function. Yeah. I should probably include an example here. I wonder recursive function n, if n equals 1, return 1, otherwise return recursive function n minus 1. Okay, so here's some stupid thing I just made up. Let's print out what's going on. Why aren't you... there it is. Let's call a recursive function with 5. So it should return 15 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Okay, so for example, below is a recursive function to count 1 dot 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 1 plus 2 plus dot 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 plus n. And I've converted it mechanically to an iterative function. So there's the recursive one. Now the iterative one, and I want to do this the way that I just mentioned with a stack so that we could make this mechanical and not necessarily the best way that we want to do this. Because what we could do here is we could say something like let I equals 1, I is less than n, I plus plus. And actually, it's probably worth writing this out. So let answer equals 0, answer plus equal, and this would have to be I is equal to that, answer plus equal I, return answer. This should be the same thing. Yeah. But what I wanted to do is do this with a stack iterative function 2. So what is our while loop here? While n is greater than 1. I guess we kind of do this, stack that push n, and then n minus minus, and then return the sum of stack. Yeah, that's a little bit weird, but I think that's the mechanical approach that we take to this. So that should also work. No, that gave us 14 because the stack needs to start with the number 1. Okay, so we just say greater than or equal to 1. Yeah, there we go. Have you ever worked in the place where you're the only developer? Yes. I've also often comes to me requesting things without considering the difficulty. Yep, exactly what I had happen. Yep. How's it in a big company? If you don't understand something, would you ask someone for help or would you have to learn it by yourself? Because I don't want to be that guy who keeps asking for help. So I have a couple things to say here. One, yes, this is very overwhelming, especially if you're a junior developer, because when your boss knows technology, then they'll know what they're asking. So when they say something like, hey, I need you to design a system, I need you to design Facebook, it's like, whoa, that's not the kind of task you can do in even a year. So yeah, it's important, I think, that everyone's kind of in touch. So in your position, you'd have to push back and say, hang on, I have to get back to you. I'll have to estimate it and I'll have to do research to even figure out what goes into it. In a big company, you have way more resources in terms of practically everything, including other people who can help you. So you don't want to be a person who's seen as asking for silly questions a lot, but you also shouldn't kind of paralyze yourself by not asking things that you don't know the difficulty of. And this is where I generally think some kind of mentor or buddy or something. Start to the B. Welcome back. Thanks for sharing that resub. And that way you've got someone who you can go to and say, look, this might be a stupid question. I don't know. And then they can help steer you toward what is a good question and what isn't. So in general, what I think is there's some cutoff time for trying to answer yourself. And you got to figure out what that is based on the problem. So if you're like, how do I install a program on a Mac? This is probably something you should figure out for yourself. You could probably Google it, probably find the answer really fast. And same thing, how do I sort an array in Python? But if you're like, how do I integrate with some company specific component X? Like this might be something that's way harder for you to figure out. So I would say in general, don't be afraid to ask. Probably err on the side of asking too much than not asking enough. And let coworkers know, hey, if I'm ever bothering you or if these things are ever too easy, you think, feel free to let me know and I can just go research it myself. Top K elements, you can discuss a heap or quick select. That is true, yeah. I wanted to talk about this one, like, kind of quick solution here. I think I mentioned quick select in here, yeah. But I will write that down too. I think that's a good idea. For alternatives, you could use a heap or quick select. See other notes in this. See. Yeah, I'll just write that down. Also, I am dropping some frames. What would be the optimal method you use to traverse a webpack.config file? Webpack.config is just JavaScript, right? So the only traversal of it is converting it into an abstract syntax tree. Unless you're talking about a JSON file, in which case whatever language you want that parses JSON. But I don't actually remember. I haven't used Webpack in a while. Let me look at a Webpack config. Yeah, mine was a JavaScript file, but you might be able. What is this? I'm just gonna cancel this out. That's not a stack. I guess it's technically an array, yeah. So I guess what we could do here is we could say something like, well, this is really pedantic at this point. Say let answer equals 0, while stack.length is greater than 0. Answer plus equals stack.pop. Return answer. Yeah. How fast do I type? Check out the WPM command. Like Tim sort? I don't think I've seen Tim sort. I think is it Bago sort that is. I think the algorithm works like shuffle the array until it's sorted. Is that actually it? Because I think that's my favorite joke sort, and Tim sort sounds like a joke sort. Yeah, highly inefficient sorting algorithm. it's just so clever. Obviously, it's not ever meant to be taken seriously, but it's very clever. That's for sure. Have you considered using Windows Terminal? Yes, I have, and I'm waiting for one feature, and then I'll probably switch to it permanently. And the feature I'm waiting for is for this menu to be accessible programmatically, so that I can finally color tabs based on what the tab does. So every stream, I start up 3 tabs. I want these to be like dark gray because I never look at these. And then I start up like some build processes or something. Those should be blue, and then the other one should be red, and then all my temporary ones can just be the garbage colors at the end that get added automatically. But you can't do that programmatically yet, so I'm not switching to it yet. Sad to see that the stream will die out after you start working, but that's life. Yeah, I'm going to try to do what I can to make sure that there's still some content, but there's going to be a lot of stuff to juggle. But take care. Have the rest of your day. Want to see a cool sort? Check out Patience Sort. Variant efficiently computes the length of the longest increasing subsequence. How does this work? Game begins with a shuffled deck of cards. They're dealt one by one. Initially, there are no piles. First card dealt forms a new pile consisting of a card. Each subsequent card is placed on the leftmost existing pile, whose top card has a value greater than or equal to. And there are no more cards. I think I was expecting this to be more of a joke. This doesn't actually sound too joking here. It sounds like a bucketized sorting. Again, I was skimming pretty quickly, I think. Oh, because of its nested complexity? Okay, never mind. I wasn't sure what the context was. Oh, using merge at higher ends and insertion at lower ends. Yeah, okay. I didn't know by that name. Thanks, yes, sir. By programmatically, you mean other than through the config file? I mean, the only way to do this right now is by right-clicking this and selecting a color. And what I want is some way to say like color green, which granted you can do. It'll just change the color of. Oh wait, I'm on PowerShell. How do I? Okay. So you can change colors of the background here. I want something like that for the tab. And so iTerm2, which I used when I was on a Mac, has that feature, and it was awesome. We'll see who's laughing. It'll be you, that's for sure. And your bank will be laughing too. Here we formulate. Okay, so let's keep going here. Converting recursive. Oh yeah, so I never actually did this. So let's copy this in. Okay. Here's the mechanically converted iterative approach using a stack. Mechanical iterative. I don't think I turned this into code either, did I? Oh, I did. Darn it. No. Whatever. I gotta do this again then. Ugh. There's that one. There's that one. And then here's the more idiomatic way of writing the iterative approach, since the stack is unnecessary. And that is here. There. And this is idiomatic iterative. Yeah, so this is how you would write this as a human. This is how you would write this if you were just mechanically converting from, hey, let's do the same thing the recursive function did, but with an iterative approach. Check if the array is sorted, and if it isn't, you wait a bit and check again. If you wait long enough, bit flipping another memory errors will eventually get you there. I guess there's another, what is it? Technically, since pi is non-repeating and non-terminating, that you have all data encoded in it. This actually isn't. Yeah, no, this is true. Yeah. So if you figure out a start index, an end index, and an encoding, that you will have any amount of data in it. And I mean, an easy way of seeing that, if you just say like 3.14 is the thing, and you say your start index is here and your end index is here, and then you have a table where your table is like 14, the entire novel of Harry Potter or something like that, you know? Like, this is a very simplified idea. Did I pitch Botland to potential investors? No, I didn't. Is the HTML still up? Yeah, it is. You can send me a message on Discord, JHK, and I can help you out. Okay, if you only want to store unique values, use a set. i.e. if you find yourself making a hash map whose values are all true just because you need something, then you don't really need a hash map. That was, I think, my point of this note. All right, quick sort is a divide and conquer algorithm where you pick a pivot, then you partition the list into two lists of less than or greater than the pivot. Quick select is just for finding the kth smallest value. At the end of each partition, you know the final list index for the pivot itself. So if the index of the pivot is equal to k, then you found the kth smallest value. If not, you continue sorting around the pivot until you do find the correct index. To do this, you only need a recursion to one of the two partitions. Yeah, these are both, I think, good to know as exactly what's written here. And I think knowing any more is probably academic. For interviews, at least. Because I don't know who as an interviewer is going to be like, right quick sort. I think it at some point was too common of a question where now people aren't going to ask it. And also, I don't think it tells you anything. And quick select, I think, is a little bit more important. And that shows up in interview questions still, I bet. All right, binary tree or binary search. A binary search doesn't necessarily have to be on sorted data. You just need to be able to eliminate half the data with a condition. That condition, when searching for an exact value, is typically less than, equal, greater than. It could be a function returning an order. Binary searching over matrices typically means doing binary searches within some dimension of it, a row or column. For example, if you have height rows and width columns and you know that they're each sorted, you can go through each row and binary search over each column. Yeah, this tripped me up a lot on some of the LeetCode problems that I did, because I thought, I know there's a way to do binary search here, but I thought of doing it like diagonally, and that didn't really make sense. You can get the pseudocode in 3 seconds. That's constant time pseudocode. That's pretty good. Basic code for binary search. Yep. So you have a left and a right. You check to see until they overlap or they're touching each other without overlapping. You get the middle value. And if it's less than, you check the right side. If it's greater than, you check the left side. Good. Yep. Yeah. Some of the easy problems are harder than I thought. That is not necessarily a reflection on you, just FYI, because every once in a while you'll find an easy problem that is masquerading as a medium problem or vice versa. So Scrabble, this is one of the things, this is what I try to talk about in this top section up here of go easy on yourself. And I'll paste this into chat really fast, so I was going to lose the formatting when I do this. Whoops. Actually, I guess I could make this markdown, although I'm not going to type it out like that. Text only. Yeah. So 1, I suggest reading this. 2, I suggest there are like 2 main things you can learn while doing LeetCode problems. One is a technique you've just never seen. So for example, if you've never seen BFS or DFS or a cycle detection algorithm or something like that, you might just never have seen this. In which case, look at the solutions, look at the discussions, and see if that makes sense to you. Now, if you did see the technique before, so you've used a BFS and you're like, I just didn't realize that it was a BFS, then try to spot patterns that indicate that you need that technique. So there's something that I think is pretty interesting here. If you have a sorted array, chances are that property of it being sorted is going to lead to you being able to do something in log n instead of n time. And it's all because it's sorted now, which allows for things like binary searching. And I don't know, you might think of, there might be another pattern here where you have like a binary search tree and you realize that doing the in-order traversal is going to lead to a sorted array, and it gives you that same general idea here. Or when you see trees, you think of things in log time as well, because typically you only have to traverse through one path from root to leaf. So those sorts of patterns can be heuristics for you in the future. I just sent a DM on Discord. Obviously, check out the stream. Maybe that's what you meant. I was talking to somebody else who I Can't find in chat. Oh yeah, this. I was talking to Ross here, but I'll read your PM as well. I don't know what it's about right now. Do you need to know some complexity theory for the positions you're applying for? Yeah. Like how to show that 2 SAT is in P. That you don't need to know too much about. They said you should know a little bit about non-deterministic polynomial problems, and I don't know to what extent. I don't know if they're talking about like, can you discuss the difference between NP complete, NP hard? So yeah, I don't know what level they want for that. Hey, Quando. And I'm doing well. Do you have any book suggestions for design patterns and cleaner code? No, I unfortunately don't have any book suggestions for practically anything in CS right now. Just trying to find out about tab color, only to find out that you already created a GitHub issue. I was on top of that. Windows terminal. Yeah. And they said it's a good idea. Author me. Is there anything new on it? No. Okay, let's keep going. So we got to out of memory problems, I think. Here's that. Yeah, if you try solving a problem and you run out of memory because you're testing every value or storing an array, then you likely don't actually need every value. You probably just keep track of the last one or some rolling count. Yeah, sure. If you're asked to merge or reorder linked lists, remember to update next on every node. For example, I tried to convert this into a different order, but I'd forgotten to null out d.next, so I created a cycle. Yeah. Yeah, this example doesn't need to be this. It doesn't need to have 5 elements. It's too hard to see what the pattern is here. So I tried doing ABC to ACB. That on its own is enough, and I would just say I forgot to null out b dot. Yeah. In fact, I could even just do this with 2 elements, but I think having 3 is fine. How many interviews have I gone through so far? Kind of hard to say because I did a lot at the beginning, but they weren't this kind of interview, and I wasn't really too interested in any of the jobs. In fact, I think at least 2 of the jobs, they said, cool, we want to move on to the next step in the process, and I was just like, I don't really feel like it. And surprisingly, they never asked why. One of those recruiters is pretty checked out, though. So yeah, I don't know how many it's been. Somewhere in the low single digits, like, or not low single digits, mid single digits, like 4 to 6 probably. Yeah, I guess it's good to be selective, but I don't really look at it as me being selective. It's me not knowing what I want. Yeah, because if I knew what I want, I probably wouldn't have applied to those companies to begin with. All right, you can reverse a linked list in place by keeping track of the previous node and temporarily storing the heads next before overwriting into the previous. Yeah, this is something I just feel like I'm just gonna have to memorize. This font is terrible. So start at the head. And why do we do this? For no good reason, right? Yeah, for no good reason. Because we don't ever use the head anymore. So we could just have called node. So let previous, let temp. And we set this. They are going to ask you to reverse a linked list. I feel like it could be part of a problem though, because there was a LeetCode question that came up that said something like, how do you tell that a linked list is a palindrome in place? And it was to reverse the latter half of the linked list and then keep track of 2 pointers and just iterate over. Though they also said you can't use extra memory, otherwise you could just keep track of, you could make it a doubly linked list. Game dev jobs or pretty much any type. I think I'm actually not looking for game dev jobs, so pretty much anything that's not game dev, but typically it's back end. Yeah, and I wouldn't mind working on a games back end, but I don't think I want to do game development for a job. You know what you want? You want to keep streaming? Streaming has been so helpful and amazing, especially days like yesterday. I still really appreciate the conversation we all had. That was really good. Are machine learning engineers in high demand right now? Yeah, from what I've seen. Okay, well, let's copy this just into here. Yeah. Define cycles in a linked list. This I remember. Generating all subsets of a set. This is just counting in binary, where a 1 represents that you include the answer in the subset. For example, A, B, C can form 8 sets. Just count from 0 to 2 to the third and omit all possible values. Alternatively, you can think of a search with duplicates removed. For example, this code will generate all combinations of any number of letters for this problem. What's this problem? A set of tiles where each tile has one letter printed on it. Return the number of possible non-empty sequence of letters you can make. This is kind of cheating. Yeah, I feel like this is kind of cheating. Okay, that's fine. We're actually almost at the bottom of this note. Then we have system design stuff to cover. So arrays, ask yourself some quick questions. Will sorting help? Will a sliding or rolling window help? Will working from both ends help? Will splitting it into an array of head or tail work? Keeping track of deltas help? Yeah, there are like a million array problems out there. And these are just a bunch of little tips. Whenever you need to slice arrays, consider just storing where the slice would start and stop. Yep. This is how some languages do these things, like Rust. So union find, I watched some videos on. I don't know if I'll get asked about this. I think I have the video enough in my memory where I could probably do this. But I don't know if I'll ever know that I'm supposed to apply this as an algorithm. I don't know if it's worth studying. So it's for finding cycles in an undirected graph or to find the minimum spanning tree of a graph. Yeah. Yeah, I wrote out a whole bunch of notes. Problem of enumerating all k subsets may appear when dealing with an NP-complete problem. Yeah, I think the part that was important for me was realizing just like, well, how do you do this? Because at some point you realize, hey, I just need all these subsets. Now how do I generate them? And maybe there are 5 elements, and so you're going to need to generate whatever, like 3 to the 5th possible combinations or something. It can also be recursion with 2 paths, one that takes the current element and one doesn't. Yeah, that's what this was talking about, splitting it in a head and tail. All right, big O versus big theta. Big O is upper bound, big theta is an upper and lower bound. Technically, anything that is O of n is also O of n squared, and also O of n to the third. Because the subsequent big O's are even worse than the first. Yeah, this is technically true. And that's why big theta is sometimes a better frame of reference here. But I don't think this is very important. I think like on a colloquial level, just saying, oh, big theta is the real runtime of something, I think is probably fine. All right, palindromes may be helpful to work from the middle and radiate outward. 2 pointer problems. This is a very difficult category for me to do, given by how many off by 1 errors I'd have. Thoroughly test each case while it's still pseudocode, and opt for iterators and coroutines. Yeah, this is where I think the prep was pretty interesting because I learned where I make mistakes. And in every 2 pointer problem, I made essentially every single mistake you could make. Like the algorithm would be fine, and then I just would randomly say, okay, +1 here, -1 here. The answer is always be wrong. Game programmers are usually very competent and intelligent. The problems are also very interesting. Yeah, I think there's a lot of like if you think of performance critical code, I think you'll find that quite a lot in games. Whereas for a lot of other systems that get designed, it's like, yeah, well, the performance matters, but we're not going down to the level of op- optimizing for hardware. That still happens in games, apparently. Although I really hope that gets offloaded to the engine level. That's what Unreal 4 looks like it's trying to do too. So system design we'll get to afterward. Questions for a company. I should probably still come up with these that I want to ask. Guess I could always just use this list. Because let me think. Let's say it's Friday, I'm in the Amazon interview. I get done with something and they're like, so do you have any questions for me? What do I actually care about? I guess I care about like, do you like the team? And what do you like about the team? How much do you like coronavirus? Yeah. This is weird because I've never applied to a company before that's not remote but is remote now. In fact, I mean, most people probably really didn't get an opportunity to do that until now. Like, presumably, the people I'm going to be talking to have all met each other in real life, but I won't meet them in real life for another year. That's very strange. There are a lot of things through the drivers as well. Interesting. Doesn't the interviewer also need to be prepared and brushed up on specific things? Yeah, they do. They generally know their problem inside and out, so they know what general techniques and how do people approach it and what are the time complexities of these things. So you're applying to jobs that are local, but right now won't be. Yeah, exactly. Got to schedule meetings to talk with people nowadays. Yeah, and I don't know how these dynamics work because there's a lot of team building that happens that you just don't really see. Where you drop by someone's office, ask them a question, then you see something interesting on their wall, and you're like, "Oh, cool! Did you run in that 10K race or something?" And then they get to talk a little bit about it, and you find out you have something in common. And now it's like you, I don't know how many people are doing video calling, working from home, but if you don't even have your video on, you don't even know what the other person looks like. That's very weird. So yeah, maybe I should ask about some of that. Is the team remote? Do I have any coronavirus stuff here? Yeah, COVID related questions. I'll put this all the way at the bottom. Bremir had actually suggested one. So, how do you do team building exercises or just or or even just regular communications while everyone is working remote? E.g., do people mostly talk with their webcams on? Is it just voice? Hey, noise. I'm doing well. I think what's your coronavirus policy is a very valid question. What Bremir suggested was like, how did the company handle COVID? I don't know if it's necessarily what's the policy. I feel like the policy is something a little more like, how does this affect the day to day life? I guess when are people going back to work and everything? Yeah, young coach, this isn't necessarily meant to be like an ask every one of these questions kind of thing, especially because a lot of times they'll answer them for you. Like, who am I speaking to? Yeah, this is a question for some people because someone would just call me and I'd be like, are you the CEO? Are you just a lead on the team? But typically in an Amazon or Google type of interview, they'll tell you at the beginning, hey, I'm so and so and I work on this team. And typically the team is going to be the team you're on. At Google, it's not necessarily that. But that way you don't necessarily have to ask those sorts of things. Same thing as the job remote. Like most of the cases you already know. And then the other ones are based on what you find interesting. Yeah. if you ask all these questions, they'll ignore you. Wait, what? I definitely don't agree with that. What these questions are is for the portion of the interview where you're finally done with whatever your responsibilities were. You've answered their behavioral questions, you've answered their technical question, and now they're like, "Hey, okay, do you have any questions for me?" So, when I was interviewing last, which was like 2014, and I was in person, I just brought a gigantic list of notes with all these questions. I asked everyone. Everyone was like more than happy to answer. Although every once in a while they'd give a diplomatic answer more than a truthful answer. But that was still telling in itself if I could gauge that they weren't being entirely truthful. So yeah. Do you ask when should I hear back? Yeah, I typically ask like what's the next step? And some companies do prioritize this. Amazon, I guess, gets back to you typically within like a day. Now, with that said, I asked Google this to the recruiter, and the recruiter told me this is a very long process. So I'm not going to ask the interviewer this now. But I would ask the interviewer, like, do you like the team? Do you like working with the company? What do you feel are the pitfalls of working here? Never worked. I mean, sure, it worked for me before. I think it's fair to say in your experience it hasn't worked, but I don't think it's fair to say they won't answer these questions. They might not, they might. In my experience, they have. In someone else's experience, they might not have. All right, specific problems with interesting approaches. What do we have here? Best solution seems to be to open an array of strings. Yeah, only real problem here is forming all happy strings. And it's not tough if you use DFS. Yeah, some of these things are, I should just read out loud here. You can treat both sorted lists as queues. Only plop a number off the correct list. When one list is empty, concatenate the entire other list. Yeah. In this heat, finding the perfect grill is a huge concern. I agree. Wait a second, all grills are hot. You can't grill food without that. How would you generalize this to merge n sorted lists? Same general concept of just you got many arrays and now you're just popping off the lowest one from each one. And then you can stop considering those. You can have an array of arrays there. Yeah. But these are the kinds of things that showed up like during elite code section where I thought the code I wrote wasn't as few lines as possible. And it wasn't necessarily that I needed something very generic for it. Cultural changes how they improve the social integration. Yeah. I think that's interesting. So how is company supporting remote work? Cultural changes have there been? Yeah. I think Wormhole's being facetious, Dr. Marr. I wish you didn't need a job, or are you excited about this as a chapter for you? I'm not super excited about this, no. Yeah. I mean, this is, I think a lot of people in my position would say kind of the same thing. I'm going from what's essentially a dream job to something else. Is it possible this next thing's a dream job? Yeah, but it's like that Family Guy joke about the mystery box can be anything. It could even be a boat. It's like if you know that you have a choice of a boat and a mystery box and you want a boat, you just go with a boat, right? Like I already have what I think is a dream job, and now I'm moving to something else which might be a dream job. Oh, Goldskin, I turned off subscriptions on the channel since I'm not going to be streaming full time anymore. So that's why you can't sub. But thank you for even looking for the sub button. I appreciate it. Congrats. Congrats on what? I think there might be something that was misinterpreted. What I was trying to say is what I was working on with Botland and with Adam Learns, those were the dream jobs I was talking about. What I'm saying is the something else from earlier hasn't actually happened yet. I haven't gotten a new job yet. Yeah, Ultramark is still subbed. For everybody else, they're not. Actually, I looked at my sub count today. It's still about how many people? Let me see. 93. I'm glad you're not bursting through the door. Hello and good morning. Hang on one second. Okay. Hey, Mrs. Adam. Ultramark says hello. Yep. Okay, she says hi. But just to you, Ultramark. She didn't say to anybody else in chat. Quando, she's gone now. No one else is important enough for her to greet. All right, let's finish these things. Yeah, there was something. I think this is fine. Actually, I don't know. I had some other code I wanted to look at really fast. Something in here, but I'm never going to be able to find it, am I? Let's search for base. That's probably what I wrote it as. Nope. Who knows then? Who knows? Maybe number 26? I don't even know what I called it. And there are too many files here to look through all of them. Yeah, well, whatever. Hey, Crows. Okay, well, we've gone through those notes. Now let's go through all the system design notes. This is actually equally long, but it might be quicker to go through because it's maybe less dense. So let's see. Sounds like the overall goal here is know a little bit about everything, how the internet works, what a load balancer is, etc. You don't need to know specific technologies, so it's not important if you've used Google's cloud and you're interviewing in Amazon. Yeah, I don't think companies generally care about that. Excuse me. Especially because you might be an expert at AWS and know every single service inside and out. And if you go work at Google, they're probably going to be like, that's actually a benefit because you've got experience in this and not necessarily, well, you didn't use our cloud, so it doesn't matter. So, yeah, I think this is still something I believe in. All right, to get started, I just search for, yeah, this stuff I'm not going to look over. So, high level summary on my thoughts. System design covers everything from the high level architecture, like we need a load balancer in front of horizontally scalable web servers, to lower level design, like there should be 3 classes in this set of code files, and they have these responsibilities. As such, you can think of system design as being one system composed of many subsystems, where even most of the subsystems can be looked at that same way, recursively. For a more concrete example, consider the mechanism by which applications scale, assuming you aren't deploying on an existing cloud platform. You'd have to have some service that keeps track of the metrics by which you're scaling, CPU utilization, network traffic. That service would be subject to the same constraints as any other system that you design. Which parts of CAP does it need to satisfy? Does it need to be consistent? Is it the single point of failure? Is it the single point of failure? Is it a single point of failure, I guess? Yeah. Not gonna show what I'm laughing at. No, in reality, the mechanism for scaling is typically some kind of orchestration endpoint, like a Kubernetes cluster. You may want an active-active setup, an active-passive setup, but that one system in your overall design, the scaling system, is itself an entire system design. Yeah, this for me was a revelation coming to this conclusion. I don't know how many people are going to be like, well, yeah, obviously systems are composed of other systems, and unless you're talking about the tiniest little atom of a system, that you can break it down further. If you're interviewing for a company, it's important that you stay at the level of detail that your interviewer expects. You could drill down to the question of how do I make a load balancer, but they probably want you to examine the parts of the problem you'd be solving on the job. It's pretty likely the job already has load balancers. That's why it's important to talk about trade-offs. If there were a single solution that fit everyone's needs, then design interviews would be replaced by understanding exactly how that solution works. Yeah, I still highly believe in what I wrote here. So I am very glad that I've got that. All right, example regarding that high level summary. I wanted to figure out how I'd implement a pub subsystem like existing ones out there. I got really stuck because I kept introducing more systems like a load balancer, something to scale the system, etc. However, by looking at things that way, I wasn't considering just the system in question, the pub sub itself. Instead, I think it's good to focus on what the API may look like. then I should say how the API looks. May look, yeah, that's fine. Then figure out how you'd scale this. For PubSub, the API when used on a single machine is the same as the API used across multiple machines. Yep, publish and subscribe. That's it. As with the transport layer, you can implement this over TCP or UDP. I assume it's done through TCP since reliable delivery is important. Yep. Pretty good. Pat myself on the back for this one. I think these are some good notes. All right, short version of my framework. Understand the system, its users, any other parameters, do a high-level design, dive deeper into the most important parts, and refine any systems and handle scalability problems, single points of failure, any bottlenecks. Yeah, and I think this is again where the prep really helped because I learned what I got stuck on. And what I got stuck on in the first mock interview was not tackling the core of the problem. So I was kind of covering too much breadth and not diving into the depth that was needed enough. And I think in the second mock interview, we talked about I was focusing on more ideal solutions versus real world solutions. So again, an ideal solution might be something like, yeah, sure, we'd have 6 systems and they'd all communicate in this way. And the real world solution might be like, you know what, we're just going to have a number somewhere. Maybe it's in the database. And maybe we do that because it's just the fastest possible thing. And we're not going to spend a year developing the perfect system. Could I elaborate more about what happened with Microsoft? Yeah, so the Microsoft process was something like, I'm going to just make up a date here. Let's say like June 20th. I don't know. I had a referral from someone I know there. And then it wasn't until, and again, I'm just making up dates here. Let's say like August 1st, I hadn't heard anything. So my referrer pinged a hiring manager. That manager reached out, and then one of their direct reports reached out, and that was Friday. And that's when I figured out it wasn't a good fit. And then that's it. Now I haven't heard back from Microsoft at all. So what I was saying about this is in any large enough organization, you have a structure where it's like a manager, another manager, another manager, another manager, and then some like leaf nodes here, the actual employees with no one under them. So at some level, you're going to have the CEO and then you're going to have VPs and whatever else. So this is the person I talked to at first. A manager reached out, and then I talked to the person beneath them. Both of these people seemed to want to hire me, but they're not going to go talk to other managers in the company and be like, okay, this guy needs to work here. So that's it. It just kind of just fizzles out. And now I'm stuck in this limbo where I sent an email on Friday to I guess HR, a recruiter. And I said, hey, I don't actually think this would be a good fit, but I've had a ton of friction trying to find jobs through the automated site. Is there anything that you know about that I could apply to? And he just never responded. And it's Tuesday now. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere, which I think is kind of a shame because, like I said, I feel like the couple of managers I talked to, they seem to like me, but I doubt that's going to go anywhere. It just kind of sucks. How many places are you applying to? Are you being selective? Has COVID caused any issues? The whole process for me has been very much all over the place. I applied to a bunch of places originally. I had no idea what I wanted to work on and figured I'd just suss it out during the interview process. And the only thing I sussed out was that I still have no idea what I want. So I am now just focusing on a couple of interviews I have coming up, which is Amazon on Friday, Google on Monday. Sending an email on Friday is just the death zone of emails. Yeah. Wormhole, do you mind pulling back a little bit? I'll clarify if you need after the stream, but yeah. All right, so start by understanding the problem, the users, any constraints, etc. So I think short version, only read this to get an idea, but the medium version expands on this nicely. Yeah, so always start by understanding the problem, users, constraints, say what's out of scope, typically handling payments, signing up for accounts, etc. Maybe find a hand wave away for now. Yeah, I think that's fine. Estimate usage patterns, potentially even at the granularity where you define storage, RAM, cache, whatever. I have a feeling Google is going to want this sort of thing. Thanks, Crows. Can you give any resume tips? Yeah, my typical resume tips are don't sell yourself short, be able to talk about everything on your resume, and what was the last one I always say here? Oh yeah, the resume only exists to get you an interview. That's it. Referral should have been for an opening, right? Shouldn't be like, oh, we've got a good candidate. Now let's see where we can fit him. That's correct. Yeah. And I'm saying I think that's kind of a shame because of these big companies, if you identify that, hey, this person is a good candidate, there's got to be some team where they can fit. And if only that's one of the things I like about Google's process. They do just find a good candidate and then they figure out where they'll fit afterward. Whereas a company like Microsoft, yeah, they have a job opening. And if you totally ace the interview process, and then you're like, well, actually, I want to work somewhere else. Then they say, okay, go interview somewhere else. Yeah, don't lie on your resume as well. That's another thing. Hey, Orange. Okay. Good thing to think about is how traffic is distributed. Are there power users generating tons of traffic? Yeah, and this is where you talk about some, generic techniques. Like we can shard our system so that it can handle particular power users, and we'll have some registry for where those users are being handled now, and a way of changing that system. And if this fails, we'll have something to pick up where it left off. I think keeping your resume as a one pager is important until you actually do have enough to talk about in 2 pages. So let's say you founded 3 very successful companies. You could probably have a 2 page resume at that point. To identify the core of the problem, what's the biggest system design challenges? What are the biggest system design challenges behind this problem? Yep. Design at a high level. Is there a load balancer? Is there a caching layer? How do services communicate? Which APIs will exist? What data will we store? Talk extensively about trade-offs. Make sure you haven't missed any pieces. Don't dive into details too fast. Make sure we're focused on solving the core problem. Database schema could be important, but if you're trying to scale a service to handle 1 million real-time connections, it's probably more important to focus on that aspect. Yeah, this is all great so far. Prioritize where to dive deeper. This is based on the problem we're trying to solve. For example, if you identify that caching is the core, then diving really deep on sharding, replication, consensus, etc. Estimate capacity and throughput needs, identify bottlenecks. And general advice is that you would always benchmark and profile to find them in the real world. But sometimes you already know what the benchmarks would be because they say, hey, you're interviewing at Twitter and you know that Twitter has 100 million users. So you already know this thing needs to scale as opposed to some new service where maybe you get 10 users and then obviously it wouldn't need to scale. So, yeah. Yeah. Do you add languages or frameworks on your resume if you didn't use them at work but have built side projects with them? Yeah, I definitely would. Yeah. Stick with text and typing for as long as possible. Yeah, this is something else. Everyone has talked now about like, oh, if you need to draw diagrams, use some service online. And so I was told I could use any site that I want for Amazon, but that I can't necessarily. What is this? Oh, I'm on. I'm on Premier's thing still. Well, what? How do we get out of this? I don't actually know. Boards. Okay, I think. Yeah, I think here's what we have. Yeah, whoops. So, um, I can use any service that I want, but I don't like drawing. So I think I kind of want to just stick to text. But if I need something, I should be familiar enough with this to figure out how to use this. Yeah, I think knowing that you can some way to drag arrows, right? Yeah. We okay. Get out of the draw IO XML. What I meant by text is not something like LaTeX for generating documents out of text or something like draw.io as XML. What I meant is more like we have a load balancer and behind it we have like app servers and behind that we have some like cache and then the app servers can talk to a database as well. And then in front of all of this is like the client. And we do things like this. Like this is how I work typically. So I don't see a need to draw this stuff out, but I know that a lot of people do work with drawings. I just don't find this comfortable. Okay, now the long version. Constantly think aloud. Interviewer will probably eventually want depth somewhere, so make sure to keep them in the loop about how you're thinking. Keep break down the problem, covering as much breadth as possible while asking where they want you to go deeper. Unless they want you to do that prioritization. Not too abstract, not too detailed. Fully understand the problem, hypothetical environment, gather key requirements. Who are the users? How do they interact with the system? Where do they live? What's the budget, timeline? How much is... Yeah, I think these are good questions to ask. I had a friend ask me the other day, hey, I've got logs that are huge, like 300 megabytes, and I want to make a front end for viewing these. Like, what do you suggest doing? So I asked a bunch of questions first, and I think that came from all the system design stuff. Because I think one of the biggest questions I had was like, well, what are you using the logs for? Because if they're 300 megabytes, why even send that to a client if all they're going to end up looking at are just like errors with a couple of pieces of information, in which case just send them the errors, you know? But this is where in an interview, you've got to figure out what those answers are. Yeah, Elasticsearch or something. Yeah. I think they were looking to develop something kind of quickly and not necessarily pay. Hey, EJ. Hey, Director of Engineering, EJ. Hey, Lead Head Moderator, EJ. Talking about trade-offs extensively. Everything's a trade-off. Do you go for SQL over NoSQL? Why? Do you favor performance over consistency? Be prepared to justify every decision you make. Don't be afraid to question your design, though. You know what's been always very tough for me? So here's something that's kind of tripped me up in the past. Interviewers are there to help, apparently, right? But sometimes they ask a question for their own knowledge. I cannot type today. And I misinterpret this as them trying to help. So, for example, you write an algorithm out and they're like, or like, can you find the largest number a better way? And all they're asking is what's your thought process? But what I think is, what I hear is your way sucks. Find a better way. This is really bad because I always take it as like, oh, interviewers are there to help, right? So when they say, hey, did you do that right? I always think the answer is no, they're trying to steer me in a direction here. But I think what I need to do, and this is another one of those ways that I've kind of learned this about myself now, what I need to do is either say, like, what are you looking for here? Is it to nudge me in a direction or is it to just honestly figure out my thought process? Or just examine as though they haven't helped me at all and just take the question face value. Yeah. What's your dream job? Where do you want to be in 10 years? That's a common interview behavioral question. Yeah. I was talking about this. I think I mentioned this to you guys. Yeah, I definitely mentioned this to you. I told you about the whole Likert scale assessment for leadership principles, right? So this bugged me. This bugs me so much. They have questions that are things like, what's a good example here? Like, I feel comfortable asking for help. And it's a strongly disagree, ... strongly agree. So you've got the scale of 5 things, right? So I feel comfortable asking for help. I don't know, something like I feel comfortable procrastinating. There are all these sorts of things. And it's like, you can tell just by reading this, you know what the right answer is, what they're looking for. Like asking for help. Oh yeah, definitely. I'm willing to ask for help all the time. Comfortable procrastinating? No, never. I've never procrastinated in my life. I scoff at the idea. And you go through all the questions just like that, right? You know what the right answer is and you can answer that. This is kind of how I feel some of these questions are, where you could take it in an honest way of like, what's your dream job? Okay, well, I'd love to work as a lighthouse attendant or something. I don't know what. They'd be like, that has nothing to do with this. Why would you say that? Where the right answer might be something like basically describing the job you're about to get in words that doesn't make it so obvious it's that job. I'd love to have a huge impact and work with the smartest engineers and whatever else. And it's like, cool, that's probably the answer they're looking for, right? Because how do they know what's on your mind? And if you were to answer something like, you know what, I just want to work on games, and you're applying for a company that doesn't even do games, it'd be like, why aren't you doing that? So this part of the process bugs me. It just really bugs me. It's all about marketing yourself more than it is about telling the truth. I don't like that. How do you keep track of tasks? You mean you ask candidates that, right? Yeah. Hey, Cubic. Problem with answering what you think they want to know is that you have no idea what the right answer is. Just be honest. I've been honest in interviews before. Oh, I mean, I'm mostly honest in interviews. I won't, actually, what happened getting the Microsoft job that I had, they asked, why do you want to work here? And I said, it's a job and I want money. And most people would advise not saying that, right? But that was my honest answer. And she was like shocked at what I said. And I was like, wait, well, why do you want to work here? Like, and she said, ever since I was a kid, I dreamed of working at Microsoft, and now I'm finally here. And I was like, great, that's a perfect answer. But would you rather I have lied and told you that? She's like, no, but she probably did not give me very good feedback for that interview. But I think this is probably the answer for most people, which is why I think there's some level of being honest and some level of skirting around this with marketing. They use to weed out people who are oblivious to this kind of thing and would perhaps not thrive in a corporate environment. Yeah, yeah. And I think Amazon takes it to kind of an extreme here because they have these leadership principles and they have 14 of them. And this is what we spent all of yesterday, well, not all of yesterday, but a lot of yesterday doing was we wrote out all the leadership principles. Then I wrote out my interpretation of all of them very succinctly. And then I wrote out stories sorted by what is the main principle that I can talk about here and split into situation, task, action, result, and also learnings. And there. So now I have a bunch of different stories I can talk about. And I have to do this because this is their process. I think this is pretty silly. Has anybody ever told you you may be overthinking things a tiny bit? I don't even know what to believe anymore. But yes, people have obviously said that to me. But this document about you suck at the coding interview is what made me think, yeah, you just got to take like 120 plus hours now and do everything you can. And I think it was helpful for getting better at the interview process, but I don't think it was helpful for much else. So it's hard to know if I'm overthinking things because some people have said I didn't study at all and I got a job, and I've studied in the past and I've gotten jobs, and I think you're gonna have to take one story and demonstrate multiple principles in that story. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's actually what I have here. I listed most of these out as a principle at the top and then all the sub principles that are there. And that way I could figure out like what stories are relevant for what. Did I prepare for the SET interview at Microsoft? How is it different in interview prep compared to last time? Well, Microsoft wasn't the last time. Microsoft was a while ago. I don't remember what I did for prep then. But when I was last looking for a job was 2014, which was the job right before I quit and started working on Botland. And for that, I did some level of studying, but I mostly tried tailoring it to the positions that I was going to get. So, like I said, 2015 was I started working on Botland, and this is my own company, right? Extonomist. 2014 was another job that I haven't ever talked about. And for that job, they use JavaScript. They use some other technology. It's not really worth saying. And so I looked into specific resources on JavaScript. I read that book by Douglas Crockford, JavaScript: The Good Parts. I reviewed some information that they had said would be worth reviewing. So yeah, I definitely prepped for those things, but the prep process was very different from this. And I might have interviewed at companies like Google, and actually I don't remember. I probably interviewed for Google back then. I definitely did not get offered the job. But I also know that I was not as strong in this part of the process because they'd ask things like, okay, what's the time complexity of this? And again, I would be like, are they are they saying there's a better time complexity? Like, should I just answer the question? Should I like? And I just start freaking out. And now I just answer, okay, here's the time complexity. And yeah, is there a better way? Let me think about that. So I just gotta keep my cool. Did you quit Microsoft? Yeah, I quit Microsoft. Did you take into account income status? Must be a hard decision to leave these big companies. I actually was so fed up with my job that I quit it without having another job lined up. But I did not quit it with no plan. So I quit. I pursued a bunch of different learning endeavors. That was actually when I started learning Unity. I I then started doing interview prep for the company that I wanted to work for. The reason actually why I quit was because my lead at the time had said something like, if you if you stay, you're signing up for another year, basically. And not like, well, you stay and you get done with this project for like another month or two. And I was like, I can't do that. I just can't. So it was right at the time between whatever we were at, product cycles, I don't know what. And I just couldn't commit to it. If you're not applying for a role or opening, how'd you go about answering the question? Why Microsoft? Make it too generic. Yeah. Yeah, and so I think there is a way for me to mold my answer into more than just it's money, I want a job. And still be honest about it. I am very focused on learning and becoming a better engineer. Excuse me. And and I think at almost all these big companies there are lots of opportunities for that. The other thing I could say is like, well, I'm also interested in eventually moving into a leadership position. So if there's any path for career development there too, that'd be great. Also, I wish I was let go because this was right around the time when SDETs were getting laid off by like the thousands, and I would have gotten money for quitting. That would have been nice. Kind of the same when I applied for apprenticeship. Someone asked if I choose another company. I said distance doesn't really matter. That's good. So you quit at Microsoft but got hired there. Wait, what? You quit at Microsoft but got hired there? Why all this prep when you already had a good position? Didn't you prove that you're worthy? The thing is, even if let's say I was still at Microsoft right now, like let's say I still worked at Microsoft and I wanted to go to a different team, you still have an interview loop. You're probably doing like 4 hours instead of five, but you're still going through a pretty intense interview loop. So that I worked there doesn't really matter to other companies, and it doesn't even really matter to Microsoft. Now, this is a generalization. There are probably some shifts you can do within a company and not have to go through a crazy interview loop. But yeah, I think most companies are not going to just say like, yeah, they'd be a good fit because they were a good fit somewhere else. Hey, trust me. Do they try to keep you in any way, like having HR reach out to you and ask if they could work something out? This is a long enough time ago where it's kind of hard to think about this. I think that they didn't do a whole lot. I also don't think at that point I was probably providing a lot of value for the company. The company after that, I remember going to my, so I use terminology here, skip level boss or just skip level. But basically, you think about this, you have a lead of a lead of like me. So this would be the skip level, right? So I remember going to my skip level boss and saying, like, hey, I'm not really learning on the job anymore. I think I want to pursue my own thing. And he was like, what if I made a team specifically for you? I made you the lead of that team and you could like set out on your own charter here. So, but that's because I wasn't like super burned out of the job. I just realized it was time to switch. So I think I was still providing enough value where they felt confident in like, let's try to retain this guy. But I was like, no, I appreciate it, but I've already kind of made my decision here. Am I applying to any unicorn startup? Not really, no. It's just the two companies that I talked about right now. It's Amazon and Google, and it might be Microsoft if they get back to me. Is that why you became the director of engineering? You were gonna leave, and they're like, "Time to promote this guy. He threatened us." You sent me Amazon coding questions. No, you don't have to do that. I'm totally fine going in blind for that. You think companies still hire programmers 10 to 20 years from now? That's a pretty tough question to answer because it all depends on what advancements are made in the next 10 to 20 years, but I can't see them going away in that period of time. I think this is a bubble that is going to burst eventually as AI gets better, but I don't think AI is anywhere close to being that level yet that you got. I mean, maybe after I do the interview, but even then, you probably aren't allowed to share it. Okay, so talk about your experience with the technology if relevant. I'm not sure how I got this tip here. I wonder if it was from the document that Google linked. Prioritize, better talk about big things in the bike shed. Consider main APIs that you may want in your system. Who would call them? Estimate capacity and throughput. Yeah. And then cover all tenets of software, security, accessibility, localization. Yeah. Okay. Yep, yep. Are the mock interview VODs still on Twitch? They should be, yeah. Graduated my bachelor's degree in CS. Now I get my master's degree. Should I apply for a new grad position or internship in FANG? These questions are so subjective that it's tough to say. I, I think the only thing I can really respond to this is you've got to figure out what's important to you and then which path will get you to what's important to you. So an internship position in FANG, totally viable option. New grad position, totally viable option. Oh, if you're actually asking only should you get a new grad position or an internship at a FANG company, just those, I would say the new grad position probably makes the most sense. I think internships are typically over the summer for some companies. And you could always just ask the company too. Like, hey, here's my position. Talk to HR. What SDE level are you considering? So there's some levels that FYI. And I said something in the like this general rectangle that I'm drawing. So like for Google level 5, I guess, Facebook. Amazon. Amazon, yeah, like a level 6 ideally. And Microsoft would be somewhere from like 63 to 65. Yeah, no problem. Okay. Even when AI gets better, programmers close to metal will be paid in gold. They'll be paid in silicon. They'll be even closer to metal. Heard that a good portion of engineers in these big companies are from outside the USA. How does it make you feel about getting into politics? Do you think that adds value to the company or creates some sort of cultural barrier? I think it adds value, yeah. I think one thing that I've kind of seen in my time is there are cultural differences in the impact management. I was saying this about, so I've said this before. My wife is Indian, as in she's actually born in India. I've now been to India, I think 2 or 3 times. I don't remember. And when we go for a decent amount of time. So it's not like a 2-day visit or something. And so I get to witness firsthand some of the Indian culture that I see in the US, and communication styles are just different from what I'm used to. And that doesn't even necessarily mean American versus Indian. It means like just what I'm used to. So it could be state, it could just be my family, I don't know. But what I've found is that communication in India is somewhat less direct than in the US. And so you'll have a point and I guess there's this classic example where I would ask a question. I say something like, "Are you hungry?" And my wife might originally have said something like, "We don't have food in the fridge." And I'd say like, "There's a weird disconnect between what's happening here." Like I ask a question, and my question might be a very literal question of like, "Do you want food?" and not, "Do I want food?" But for her to answer in this way was like, there's just some mismatch, you know. And I see this in management styles sometimes where I think there's a certain perception you need to manage in both cultures, and you do so differently. So to that end, I think it can sometimes detract from the value. But in terms of engineering, in terms of ideation, I think it can provide value. Would you mention to an interviewer that your stream? It's on my resume. My resume is basically like work history, like projects, whatever else, and I have a section for Twitch at the bottom saying like, hey, by the way, I stream on Twitch. But it's going to be almost impossible not to mention that I stream because it has influenced almost every aspect of the last 5 years. So if I say something like, "Oh yeah, so I was working on the game and I got an idea from someone," and they'll be like, "Wait, someone? I thought you worked in a startup and like you were the only dev for a while." I'd be like, "Oh yeah, you know the internet." Was she just skipping a step? Her answer would have been yes. So that doesn't really matter because there is no food. Yeah. So this one example, it's kind of, I guess it's easy to focus on the example a little bit. But what I was saying is there's some level of abstraction or indirection that happens, and you'll see this in meteor issues where it might be something like you'll get a piece of advice, hey, you should really think about blank, or this other person is just thinking about blank, but what they're really doing is giving you that advice and making it sound like it's about somebody else. And again, I'm like, some of these are broad generalizations, right? I don't say this in negative ways. They're just different styles of communication. And when you pull someone out of a culture where they've been trained their whole lives in style A and now they're in a style B kind of world, they don't necessarily adapt to that style, and that can cause friction amongst the people that they might be managing. Yeah, I see Godik. And it's not until, like I said, going to India and actually seeing what this is like firsthand is kind of what drilled in some of this, because there were some conversations I had where I just thought, am I on a comedy show? Like, does the person believe this, or is this how they're trained to talk? And I'm certain that someone would think that same way coming to the US from any number of cultures and say that same thing of like, is this really how people act or talk? And that's just why I say like there's difference in styles. One's not better or worse. There are lots of pros to being indirect about things. It can soften the blow a little bit. It can let you, well, I mean, I'm not gonna keep diving in. There are pros. That's what I want to say. Let's say I started watching a stream on and off a year ago. What motivated me to learn? Just got offered my first junior dev position. Nice. Nice. Awesome, Hurtful username. Yeah, congratulations. Really glad to hear about that. Another guy streaming on Twitch, and that impacted his job because he's very upfront with his political views on his Twitch stream. The company didn't like his view and fired him. You have to be very careful what you say here. I have been, I think, incredibly careful. So one thing is that this has always been a family-friendly stream. I don't think I've ever said a bad word on stream, except for PHP. Yeah, I don't think I've ever said anything like very controversial either. And yeah, I don't think people would find anything that questionable in my streams. And this is even counting like if someone went through the 5,000 hours of VODs or something and tried hunting down something that made me look bad. I think there'd be like, you could find out of context clips maybe. Yeah, MongoDB is web scaling. I say this as a joke. I actually really don't like this. I don't even want to fuel that. I, I say it purely for a joke. I think trashing on languages is bad. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going with this. So put yourself in the shoes of the user. What do you expect out of software? Be careful not to turn this into product design. Yeah, I think this was a trap that I almost fell into originally, but I don't think it was really an issue too much as I went on with system design. I think they've been totally work friendly in every regard. Yeah, I think so too. And I think there are streams I'm not proud of, streams where I was very frustrated, let's say, or streams that I ended after half an hour. And even then, I still have some of those VODs online. And even those, I don't think someone would say, oh man, like we definitely can't hire this person. And they'd be like, yep, I've been there. I've been frustrated. Yeah. What do you feel if Amazon hired you for PHP code base? From what I hear, Amazon is mostly Java. I don't know how much of it is Java. So micro problem, separating web versus application layer. It's a good idea to separate responsibilities. Your web layer should only handle taking web requests, passing them off to the entity that will fulfill them, then bundling the results back to the client. Generally what's done with Lambda and serverless setups. Part of the reason why is so that the web layer is more responsive. Anything CPU intensive can be done elsewhere and returned when finally done. This is generally what's done with Lambda and serverless setups, where your web layer will simply invoke a function in a managed environment. It's completely separate. It allows your web layer. Oh, I already wrote that down. Okay. Yeah. So I guess we don't need this. Where am I applying? I am currently going to be interviewing at Amazon and Google, and then if those things don't work out or I don't like the jobs, then I'll probably keep applying elsewhere. Oh wow, that was a long time ago then, Dr. Marr. Facebook didn't like him having a channel, but that's wrong, I think. I don't think it was a channel, it was his channel. I don't know enough about Tech Lead. I don't know if he said anything controversial or if it was just he's got popularity, or I don't know what happened there. So I can't really weigh in on that. Have you given yourself a time frame on when to try to get interviewed? No, not really. I thankfully have a lot of freedom in this. So I started the process of prep on I think June 26th. And yeah, June 26th was the first interview prep stream. And every stream since then, it's just been interview prep. So yeah, if this takes another 2 months or something, that's still fine. Something inappropriate or unprofessional. If anything, it just shows a more human element. It does. I imagine if that's all they saw were those streams, that they'd be like, this guy's not good at sticking with frustration. But yeah, I think that working at a traditional job, if you're ultra frustrated and just taking the rest of the day off, is not even a bad thing. There's something I was in a talk a while ago at Microsoft, and they said that as a tester, you should learn patterns about how your developer who corresponds to you writes bugs. And you might learn something like they write more bugs on Fridays than they do on the rest of the week. Maybe they're tired, maybe they're just done with the work week. And that kind of stuck with me, not because I think that level of granularity of inspecting like what's the pattern between these people writing bugs, I think that's somewhat tough, but you can kind of learn it for yourself. So in this specific case, talking about frustration, when you're frustrated and you're at work, what do you do? Like you specifically, do you just go on a walk? Do you take a break? Do you still try to work? Is your work quality as good? Do you take the day off? And so for me, what I've learned is it's best to just stop. Just take the rest of the day. Just try to alleviate the frustration however you can. And if that day didn't work for you, then there's some deeper problem and you got to figure out what's going wrong. But that's what I do. And I think it's been helpful. What position am I going for? Software dev or architecture? I'm going for software dev. You streamed accidentally. You think if they knew you streamed, they could watch a few hours? They could, yeah, but then that's time that they're paying for someone to go watch my stream. Plus, they'd have to watch an important enough portion of it. It's like if I shared a code snippet with them, they might be like, well, this tells us a little bit, but does it tell us everything? Wait, same. Oh, I see. Yeah. Oh, he does say controversial things. Okay. And how comfortable and ready are you leading a team under you? How comfortable am I? I think I'd be comfortable with it, but how ready am I think is up for the company to decide. I feel like I have leadership properties, but I don't have leadership experience. Like, yeah, for the last 5 years, I had a bunch of contractors. I didn't have employees. And so doling out work is a very different thing from kind of helping manage someone's career, guiding them through interpersonal problems. How do you feel about those tech influencers trying to sell their course as the only way to learn? On one hand, I think it's annoying. I think it can help a lot of people. I don't know if I have any specific examples of this because there are a couple people I know who are selling courses, but I think they put a lot of work into their courses. And actually, this is kind of like what I was doing when I was focusing on making courses, as I would tell people like, look, I put a lot of time into this. I think they're valuable and they might help you, but they're not the end all be all. I learned all this stuff through free resources and you can too. But if you want to shortcut that process, that's when you buy a course. But I think this is all part of just marketing. You instill this want in somebody, and if you do so with a sense of urgency, then it's more likely to work. Yeah. What if you're always frustrated at work? Yeah, that's why I was saying there could be a deeper problem. If you find that you're frustrated multiple days in a row, I think the thing that indicates the most is that there's either a problem not being addressed or that you need a vacation. Drama post, need to clear my YouTube history. Interesting. Something I've always wanted to avoid as a content creator. 7 minute workout. Huh. I'll have to try that out sometime. Although Godik, you've probably worked remotely for a while now, right? I guess that's different. I was thinking in an office setting, which is not like you can't do a workout in an office setting too. I guess it's just a little harder. What's the SketchUp software? This is called Sketchboard. I'll link it, ideally without this stuff. Yes, I'm confident, ready to lead a team given the opportunity. Yeah, this is where I think I'd have to really question whether it's better to be honest or better to paint myself in a good light, because I would probably err on the side of being honest there. Say like, here's a leadership experience I have. Am I interested in developer relations? I'm very torn about that. I think it's a job I could be good at, but I don't know how motivated to be good at it I would be. Yeah. Any free alternative? Sketchboard, I haven't paid any money and I can use it. I don't know what I'm missing. I know there are other features that I must be missing. And there's also awwapp.com. This is, you just click start drawing and you can. No, this isn't really meant for software, I guess. But yeah, you could say something like server database. Look at the kerning on those letters. Oops. Yeah, anyway, that was awwapp.com, I think. Yeah, links are fine in chat, by the way. You can type links if you want. Hey, C17R. Windows or Mac for development? Whatever the team uses is what I use. Okay, let's keep going through these. So this makes sense. Handling a task only once. Couple of ideas for this. A task queue is a simple solution, probably what everyone does. Make a task queue with at least once delivery and only remove the item from the queue when something has handled it. Or consensus algorithm. You have a concept of a leader who would handle the one-off tasks. I don't think this is very common, but it's possible. Yeah. Handling push notifications, webhooks. You essentially push notifications for updating a system without that system having to pull for updates. How the system that wants to be updated sets up a server, passes a URL, updating system attempts to call into it. Webhooks publicly accessible. Updating system will typically sign the request. Receiving system may be offline. Receiving system may hang, respond with an error. Yeah. Yeah, all this makes sense. And this is where I think having some experience makes it a little more tangible when I'm talking about it. Isn't that producer consumer? Yeah, both of these are. You have a producer and you need someone to consume it. But in this case it was handling it only once. There was a problem that I ran into with Botland. The way that Botland works is there are competitive seasons, and this isn't anything unique really. So there's a season and everyone has ratings, and then at the end of the season you can get some rewards and you can see whatever happened in the last season. And something needed to reset and dole out these rewards every month. So on July 31st, something needed to handle this. And I only needed one thing to handle it because if two things tried handling it, you might get double the rewards. And so in my infrastructure that I had, I didn't have a task queue set up, and I could have done one, but I didn't. I decided to choose an endpoint that only had one copy of it essentially and give that the responsibility. So Yeah, it was a specific sort of producer consumer kind of issue here. You saw me at a park, Edie? Oh, that's very funny. Did you think about approaching me? I mean, I would have been fine if you were like, "Hey, it's Edie from the stream." I would have been like, "Oh, cool. Nice to meet you." Also, please don't share any information about location or anything. I mean, people know it's the Seattle-ish area, but presumably it was a specific park. Can I have your autograph? I signed out at 13431. No, I'm laughing at that. Well, what I'm laughing at is the thought of Edie for some reason being there with like binoculars. Like, is that Adam? Oh my god, it is. And he's like 2 miles away. I finally found it. But that's hopefully not what happened. All right, trade-offs. The answer to every single system design question. This is C17R's immortal advice, which I think is great. Is it depends. Yeah. Didn't say he was also in the park. Yeah, I was watching you from my helicopter. Is this public? Yeah, this is public. And do I have coded on? You're gonna love this clip. You mentioned earlier someone like, wait, what? You mentioned earlier, know your worth. How do one go about accessing their worth? How do you measure what you know to see if you're undervalued by a company, underpaid? Figuring out if you're underpaid at your current company, I think, is very challenging because of how salaries typically work at companies. You work at company A, you're going to make X dollars, right? You work at company B after that, you're probably going to make like X times 1.1 to 1.3. Then you go work for company C and it's just going to keep repeating itself, right? You're going to have this, and this whole thing is going to be multiplied a little bit more. And so you'll keep getting raises by switching companies more so than by staying at the same company, which is why a lot of the big companies will have a stock vesting schedule that encourages you to stay. That way you're foregoing some of that compensation if you were to leave. To figure out your worth kind of means keeping this in mind, that you would make more money at another company, and probably talking to other developers around you about their salary or their experience. But I think in general, it's sort of an unfair process. And this is why companies want you to keep your salary secret. If you knew how much everyone is being paid, you would know when you're being underpaid. But then typically the only way to fix it is to leave or threaten to leave. Yeah. All right, complexity. One basic trade-off of adding practically any system is that it's one more thing to manage. It's another system that can fail. It's worth mentioning since some team of people have to create and design, that all takes skill. When doing real-world system design, this is clearly worth considering. But for pie in the sky, do people actually say pie in the sky? Is this antiquated now? Idioms. An impossible, unlikely, or fanciful idea or plan. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so for pie in the sky kinds of ideas, it can be worth saying what would be the perfect solution if you had infinite resources. It may be worth it. Did you read this German article about Botland? Yeah, I did. Yeah. I have a OneNote about press for Botland, and that one's in there. Threaten to leave won't work. I tried on all my past jobs. Well, it's got to be something you're able to follow through on. What I'm saying though is that, from what I understand, it's very rare for companies to say, "Oh, you think you're being underpaid? Then we'll pay you more." Very rare for that to happen. You'll have to go through some amount of like, you got to prove it, you got to do whatever else. So at my last job, I told you guys the latter half of this story. What started with is I felt like I wasn't learning, and I approached my boss and asked for a raise and pled my case. And they said, hey, we don't have it in the budget or whatever. And then when I was finally like, okay, cool, then I'm leaving. And then they're finally like, we can make a team for you. We can turn you into a lead. We can do whatever you want. That's when they're finally like, yeah, okay, we realize now you're serious about this. And that's sometimes what it takes. This is actually one of the very kind of unpleasant learnings in life that I only realized in the last like maybe 5 years is that ultimatums sometimes work or are sometimes required, I guess. Like if you don't say to a company, oh yeah, I'm willing to leave, sometimes they will never do what the thing you want them to do. And I find it kind of sad that that's what happens, but we're all sometimes very consequence driven. So it's a natural following of life. Other than money, what motivates you to work for other people? Gradually lost the meaning of working for someone over the years, especially with a lot of layoffs these days. I think having a team you like, having a product you believe in, I think those things can help. There's something I heard at Microsoft again, just from one of the employees who was there, who said something like, "People either work for the job, the money, or the people, or some combination thereof." But that's it. Those are like the main reasons. Do you like the product you're working on? Do you like the job? Do you like the company? Are you just there for the compensation? Do you like the people you work with? And if you think about it, there's probably some weight for each of these that you like. Like money is probably not 100% for somebody, right? Like chances are you like someone else who works there, the team's pretty good, or the job is okay. Or, there's some like percentage between all these. So yeah, those are the main aspects you've got to consider. Could also be other perks or benefits or commute or convenience. And thank you, Salman. Did I miss? You're both underpaid and a significant piece. I guess so. I definitely think I was underpaid. And I think that the realization was at the end of that, because I had an exit interview with HR that like, yeah, sounds like you got hired at a level too low. And that's a risk. That's something that companies have to consider. Let's say you have a level system where it's like level 1 is absolute junior engineer, and let's just say level like 6 is senior, and there's some like level 10 is the CEO or something. I don't know. I'm making up a level system here. And you are a level 5 candidate who gets hired at level 3. Now, level 3 is going to imply a certain level of compensation and responsibility. Your compensation will be lower than it is, and your responsibility may feel like it's just not engaging enough to you, which is why hiring people at the right level is very important. Likewise, hiring someone at too high a level, while you'd probably be happy with the compensation, you might find yourself overwhelmed or struggling with the responsibilities of the job. And so, yeah, I think it was unfortunate, but I think I was hired at too low a level at my last company, and it wasn't really discovered until it was too late. And then, yeah. So interesting to me how tech guys like you set up his windows. You mean just window management on here? Because while I'm streaming, I have very little to manage for this. There's like three things I'm bouncing between this, and this. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you mean. Yeah, sometimes you have to fire a client. Lefting out twice as much. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is I think why company loyalty has completely changed in the last like 50 years. I've talked to my grandfather about the companies he's worked for, and I think it was two in his life, and he doesn't have the same viewpoint as I do about company loyalty, really. I think there are people worth being loyal to, but I think it's very hard to find companies that are worth being loyal to. Even as consumers, sometimes I loved Blizzard. I still think they do good stuff. I just don't think they do great stuff anymore. Like my loyalty as a customer has kind of died down. Showing a new project, real testing and new architecture. Any advice? So, base advice: learn that stuff. How to go about doing that? Talk to other people who are doing it already. Find a mentor, like an official mentor. Meet with them every 2 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that, and see what they can advise for you as well. And spend some of your personal time if you can to fill in some of the gaps. But yeah, I think you gotta learn that stuff. need the money as I've got kids. I feel I deserve to be paid at least the average. And yeah, yeah. Now, there's this concept of golden shackles, or let's say you make X. Let's just use some low numbers here. Let's say you're making $100, and so you buy a certain type of food because you're making $100. Now you make $200, and all of a sudden your world kind of opens up. Now you start getting used to a certain lifestyle. Well, when we're talking about real numbers here, and we're talking about like your rent or your house mortgage, and you change your mortgage from like $1,000 to some place that's $3,000, let's say. Now you are tied to that. You made enough money to the point where you have elevated your costs, and you're stuck now having to make that much money. I think it's always important to realize when you're possibly entering into that. How realistic is the fear of getting fired post ultimatum, even if you get the raise, since you know they're willing to leave or potentially unhappy? That's something I actually haven't had to consider. So at that last job, had I been given a lead position and they made a team for me, I think the risk would have been pretty low. But I also don't think I would have minded too much. This is where in order to even be able to make the threat of like, I'm going to leave, you've got to be able to follow through on that. So if you ended up getting fired or managed out afterward, you've got to make sure you didn't shackle yourself to the salary. What keyboard and mouse do I use? Check the specs command. Oops. If you have an employee leave, then more than likely you have to find a replacement, which will cost time and effort. So you get, gonna give you a 10K raise, way cheaper. Yeah. How do you set up your Windows OS, not your application windows? What do you mean though? How do I set up Windows? I don't even know what a potential answer looks like for this. Like I installed it and then I use it. How'd you deal with realized you were promoted or hired at too high a level? So there are two ways to go about this, I think. One is rise to the challenge and kind of be overwhelmed for a little while, and you'll probably grow way faster as a result. And I think the second way is to perform at the level you're comfortable with until that slowly happens, and know that your performance reviews are going to reflect that. So basically, it's like kind of suck at your job for like a year while you learn the ropes, but work at a level that you're comfortable with. So maybe 40 hours a week, or work at 60 hours a week, or put in a lot of time, and yeah, end up deserving that position. It's like the fake it till you make it. Both are kind of fake it till you make it, but one is not breaking your work life balance in the process. You care about the name, but the individual parts. Yeah, and thank you, Curious Drive. Thanks, Axel. I'm glad. I'm glad you're doing that. This is, I think, one of the most satisfying parts of what the last 5 years have been. The community, the inspiration, the influence. I want to incorporate that into whatever I do for the rest of my life, because I feel like it's some small way I can give back. Because I've gotten a lot of help from the Twitch stream, from just other engineers in general. So I'm really glad other people can be influenced by this too. I think it's great. I wouldn't be able to find a replacement job. Yeah, it all depends on climate too. You can typically know whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market here. And right now, I think it is. I think it's easier for companies to find candidates than it is for candidates to find companies right now. So now would be a pretty bad time to make an ultimatum like that. But maybe, 2 years ago, things were totally different. Already to the point where you're disengaged from the company enough that it affects your performance and job satisfaction. Expect someone to eventually leave anyway. I think it can be, yeah. I think what happened at my last job was like there was a point where I realized, I'm not on the trajectory to learn anymore. But I caught it so early on that I wasn't really like totally disenfranchised from the company yet. So I think it can go either way, but it probably does trend toward what you're saying. TS. Have you tried using Vimium? No, I haven't. A lot of what I do when I'm using a mouse, I pretty much still have a keyboard on my mouse. So even in a browser setting, if I have multiple tabs open, oh, it's supposed to be a tab. If I have multiple tabs open, I have buttons on the mouse to switch between the tabs. I have a button to close a window. I have a button to maximize a window to move it around on my screen. So I don't really find a need to switch to something else, I guess. Yeah, okay. And I even have shortcuts for other things that you might not expect, like this button right here. Watch this. I can press it without really pressing it. So you adapt to whatever tasks you do frequently. Is that the World of Warcraft mouse? No, I think that was a Razer Naga. I actually have arrow keys on my mouse, so I can press up, down, left, right. And I have page up and page down, home and end. So all of this stuff is doable really easily. That's why, like I said, it's very. I don't really need to have Vim bindings or something for everything. There's a bunch of like dirt under this mouse. Shouldn't have shown this on stream. Yeah, disgusting. Also, what's kind of cool is because this is a keyboard, so I have home and end, right? But if I hold control with my other hand and hit home and end, then it's control home and control end. So it's just like having a keyboard. People also need to take into consideration what they offer the company in the current position they're in. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, for sure. All right, let's dive back into this. So trade-offs. Answer every question as depends. Complexity, we talked about that. Okay, so CAP theorem. Any distributed system can only have two of these three properties. Consistency. Every read receives the most recent information or an error. This is called strong consistency, and eventual consistency is not good enough to satisfy the C in CAP. Yeah. Availability. Every request gets a valid non-error response, even if it's not consistent. Cool. And then partition tolerance. The entire system operates even when network failure is partitioning it. Even with network failure is partitioning. I think it's probably, we can cut out a couple characters by saying even when network failure is partitioned. Yeah. Oh, nice, Keith. Yeah. Yeah, and remember, this is just my advice. I outline two ways that I see, which is basically succeed at the job now by putting a lot of time or succeed at the job later. But you have a third option, I guess, which is don't succeed at the job and find a new job. There are the four D's of to-do lists. Any task, you only have four things you can do with it. You do it now, you never do it, so you drop it, you do it later, or you give it to somebody else to do one of those four D's. That's it. Those are the four things you can do. And when you think about it, they're just binary decisions. It comes down to do it yourself versus have someone else do it. Do it now versus later, or do it versus don't do it. And those are your dimensions along which you're doing this stuff, right? So it's kind of the same thing with a job. It's like, well, your binary decision is succeed or don't succeed. And in the succeed case, it's now or later. So that's kind of how I analyze this. Oh, at the same time. I see. Okay, I should write that down. Typically debating between these. Yep. And note that you can satisfy different parts of CAP at different times. E.g. in the case of a network partition, favor consistency, but in the absence of one, favor partition tolerance. Or not in the absence of one. I don't know. I don't think I need to write an example. I don't have an opinion on app frameworks, unfortunately. I haven't looked into them enough. How to get a mentor? I think the easiest way is ask someone you think would be a good mentor. I know that might sound silly. It's like, hey, I'm thirsty. What do I do? It's drink water, right? So in this case, do you know anyone who you think, man, if they were my mentor, I'd learn a whole lot? Because then that's it. That's the simplest thing. Just go ask them. And if you don't have that network built up, then it's pretty much you have to find that network. So there are probably websites. There's probably another way. You could probably just go into like random discords and say, is anyone looking to do this? You could post to like the Learn Programming subreddit. There are a lot of different ways you can go about it then, but at that point, I can't really help too much other than say there are generic resources out there. Feel whenever you give advice or suggestions, you're coming from a position of being a very good employee. I'm sure a lot of us here are average or below average. Well, I mean, as an employee, I don't know if I've been above average for all the companies I've worked for. Like, just because you're a good engineer, let's say, let's say that you're great at engineering, you're great at leadership, you're great at any interpersonal communication. That still doesn't make you a good employee, because being a good employee means you need to exercise all of those things, and you might just be lazy. So who knows if I've actually provided value for the companies I've worked at. And that's another thing that I wondered about. And another thing that we had this very long ego conversation yesterday, which I very much enjoyed. But that's where ego plays into this quite a lot too. Can I be your mentor? Am I not already your mentor on Twitch? I think I would take on a mentee, but I think that I sort of do that in a capacity on Twitch. Yeah. Told to go away as he's busy. It doesn't work on everyone. Oh yeah, totally. And you got to respect that too, right? You might be asking someone who's got 70 mentees and they meet with them on such an infrequent basis that they're just like, you know what? I can't even take on another one. I shouldn't even have 70 of these. That's pretty ridiculous. But yeah, you can only ask. But that's where you got to start. Find your senpai. How to find somebody to mentor, as in you want to teach somebody. That I think is a little bit tougher. I think they'd have to be open to feedback, and you need to approach them in a way like, "Hey, I noticed you might be having some difficulties. Do you want me to be your mentor?" How do you give back to your mentor? Baked goods. I think baked goods are the best way. Honestly, how you give back, I don't think you do necessarily. I think the way you do it is you give back to another mentee in the future. It's a pay it forward system, not a pay it back system. And yeah, the baked good things was tongue in cheek, but really, like, you show appreciation in other ways because you presumably can't help them in the same way that they're helping you, or else you wouldn't probably need the help. A manatee? No, that's the wrong kind of thing. You can't teach a manatee anything. How many job interviews have I gone through this summer? Not a lot. Like I was saying, it's like mid single digits, like five ish. Oh, I apply to become your mentee. Like I said, if there are quick questions here and there, just joining Discord or on Twitch, I'm usually happy to answer some of these questions. And the community also is pretty helpful too. Yeah. Yeah, actually this is true too. You do a good job. Like you treat it with the seriousness you should. A lot of us were probably taught an instrument as a kid, and you probably just like went to lessons and maybe you didn't care about them. And think of what your parents must have felt like. Like, oh man, I'm paying for this. Like, I think it'd be helpful for them. They're not treating it seriously. So now imagine how your mentor would feel if they're like, I don't see this person improving. I think this will work for some people. It sounds almost sarcastic to me. But yeah, I think there are other people who would treat this as like, whoa, I don't need your help. I think this is where egos can get in the way. You evolve from a learning phase to a doing phase to a teaching phase naturally over time. Yeah, and I think the pay it forward mentality is just a great way to live in general. Like, you might not be able to give someone the same thing they gave you, but that's okay because you can probably give that thing to somebody else in the future. And as long as they keep paying it forward, then the system balances itself out. And it's just that first person who never got anything in return. Do you have any thoughts regarding QWERTY, Dvorak, Fulmark? Fulmac, excuse me. Fulmark is how another friend had mispronounced it and how I was making fun of him for years for it. Uh, yeah, I did a tiny bit of research on this, and what I found is that if you don't know how to type, that picking a keyboard layout and sticking to it is a great way to learn how to type. But apparently, from all the research I did, if you know how to type, let's say you're a great QWERTY keyboard user and you're typing at like 100 words per minute, that if you were to switch to Dvorak, you might eventually get to like 104 or something. And it would take you a very long time to do so. So is it an improvement? Yes. Is it an improvement worth pursuing over the course of months? No. So in general, unless your words per minute are like less than 50, I don't think it's really worth pursuing something like that. And what do I use? I use QWERTY. One of the things that I find a little challenging, back when I was working in more traditional professional jobs, you would find yourself at someone else's computer every once in a while. And if you can't use like a default computer setup, then it's kind of tough sometimes. So there's only so much you can customize your own machine, I feel, before you become useless at somebody else's machine. It's like I have this now collecting dust Ergodox over here. And if I ever had gotten used to this completely, I would have never been able to use like a regular keyboard again, I think. Why would you want to type fast? I think there are very good reasons to want to type fast. I still think that as a developer at a main job, you're probably still typing like 10 plus emails per day. Well, I guess it depends. But you're also probably writing up documentation. You're probably writing comments in your code. You're probably just typing messages on Discord to your friends. Like there are so many ways when typing still comes in. It is true that for coding, your time spent actually literally writing out lines of code is probably not super important. But that's just such a small portion of all of the typing that you do. Comes out of you. It takes a long time figuring out how to do something. Yeah, yeah. You don't use your Ergodox. Why? Considering buying one, they cost a lot. My gripes are that I spent so much time trying to invest in a layout to just figure out what I was doing. And so the one that I ended up with was this. Here are my version 9 pictures, which tells you how much I spent trying to do this, right? And I had the pointer finger keys set to control. That was a big mistake, I think. There are a lot of shortcuts that you do by molding your hand into a particular position so that it's ingrained in your muscle memory. So like if I want to activate Konimu right now, I'm going to move my hand like this because that's the line of keys I need to press to activate it. But here, if I wanted to press like Control Shift C, I had to move my thumb up to Control, pinky over to Shift, and then some other finger to C, and it was very awkward. Unless I hit Control with my other hand, which I still use a mouse, because like I said, I basically have a keyboard on my mouse. So I just never got used to that. And you might say, well, why not just bind Control to where you're used to having it? And I just, at that point, had kind of given up on the keyboard. Because I thought, what's the point of using an Ergodox if I'm going to still shift my hand in awkward positions? Yeah, it's amazing what games can do for people. And I walked the team through my coding challenge and test on a big screen. They handed me a Mac. I pressed like 3 keys and said nope. Yeah, this is why I very much customize Visual Studio Code. I do a lot of things here, like I'll even do math in here where I'm like, what's 25 times 5? And it just solves it for me, right? Then we go into Elite Code setting and I don't have all those shortcuts. So I learned enough about how you do some things in general editors. So something that I learned is if I ever want to duplicate a line, typically I don't bother learning the shortcut for duplicate. I know that copy with no selection is typically going to be copy the whole line. So now I can paste it that way, and there, I duplicated the line. So I learned these workarounds for this stuff. This is how I learned a bunch of alt codes, by the way. So this is how I can, oh wow, I actually forgot this one. Yeah, I can type like, there's another K that I know now. This, and it's just because I was bored in a video game and spent a bunch of time memorizing alt codes. Fun stuff, right, everybody? Okay, let's keep reading through this. So imagine a system with 3 machines. A and B can't communicate. A and C. Yep. Availability is concerned with individual nodes. Partition tolerance for the whole cluster. Typically debating between consistency and availability, since you always want your system to be, available. Should be italicized. Okay, it's possible to have an AP system, something like 99.99% consistency. Doesn't violate that you can only have two properties, but it's pretty close. Yep. Okay. You can do this. So favor consistency over availability when eventual consistency isn't good enough. You require something like database transactions, all or nothing property. Interacting with purchase data. Yeah. Favor availability when uptime or potentially performance is more important. Remember that availability is about individual nodes. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Weak consistency is kind of ill defined, but it's just do what we can to make it consistent. It may never even end up being consistent. Eventual consistency is that it will end up being consistent, and strong consistency is that it will always be consistent. And for availability, you can have failover or replication or replication. Only one endpoint's handling traffic. Yep. This all sounds good. Yeah, LeetCode Premium is like $30 a month, which is what it turned me off from getting it. Actually, really any price would have turned me off, I suppose. So I shouldn't say that. And thank you, Cake. I appreciate that. I think it's 30. Don't quote me on that. Yeah. You should just take a look at it. LeetCode Premium. I'm pretty sure it's 30 a month. Yeah, 35 a month or 159 per year. We think 1 month should satisfy most people. But that's if you plan on using it every day. Yeah. All right, so one primary and secondary. Secondary is for reading, not writing. If primary goes offline, you have to promote to the secondary endpoints. Multiple primary. Both primary endpoints can serve reads and writes. They collaborate on writes. Either goes offline, they can continue to operate. Yeah, so this collaboration on writes is another one of those things where you always need to ask yourself, how does this work? Is there eventual consistency? Is there strong consistency? And you can answer that. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning of this whole note, which is each system can be considered to have a bunch of subsystems until you finally got into the atomic unit that can't be split anymore. Yeah. So in order to know where to write, you need to modify the logic or add a load balancer. Generally sacrifice consistency here unless you synchronously update all endpoints at once. You may have a constraint that is only violated once data flows in from other system. Yeah. Okay. What kind of compensation am I aiming for? I think I'm just going to stop answering this question for now, only because it leads to a pretty large conversation usually. So let's just say if it's at one of these big companies, it's a lot of money. Appliance of the system sought to handle errors from the defunct component. Yeah. I'll write that down. When a system failed, it usually means that the availability takes a hit for some portion of time, and that responses may result in errors, which is the formal definition of availability, right? Yeah, non-error response. Yeah. Companies that I worked for in the past. The only one I shared has been Microsoft, but there were other companies too, but I haven't shared their names. And for the last 5 years, it's been my own company, which is what makes my career non-traditional at this point. So I don't know what it's going to be like in the interview process. Okay, read heavy systems. If you expect to handle more reads and writes, you want as many nodes handling reads as possible. Wouldn't care much about writes being slower. It just means adding more read-only nodes, replicating writes to them, balancing traffic across them. I don't think there's some magical technique. Yeah, and balancing traffic across them comes to how you partition your data or how you load balance. Load balancing. Yeah. Do you like listening to music while coding? Yeah, from time to time. Generally anything kind of just instrumental, not something with lyrics. Very much a fan of classical music. Active does not mean the same thing as primary. Active means that the endpoint's handling traffic. primary, both are active. Only the primary is handling routes. Yeah. They won't even care if you can answer coding questions much. I don't think they're gonna look at my work though. Like there's no part of the interview where they will ask me that qualified. And I get what you're saying, and I even generally agree with it. But the interviews are all very structured, and it's going to be either coding, it's going to be system design, it's going to be behavioral questions. And so at no point are they going to be like, all right, now show me a project you've worked on. They'll maybe glance at my resume before they get into the interview, and maybe something will be interesting to them, and then they'll probably forget by the time they want to ask me about it. So I don't expect this will ever be an opportunity for me. Okay, replication strongly affects consistency. You write to a primary endpoint and try reading from a secondary immediately. You only have strong consistency if you have synchronous writes. Yep. Yeah. This is typically done is to have secondary endpoints acknowledge the completion of some operation from the primary. If not acknowledged, then the primary will communicate, change the secondary again. Yeah. Some kind of ACK system. Stream commands. There's a disconnect to a partial resync. Yep. Okay. This is probably worth going over again before the interview. All of this stuff, not even just what I highlighted, but yeah, I'm glad I'm even researching this again now. Or reviewing it. So DNS converts domain names into IP addresses. It's hierarchical. There are a few authoritative servers. Each one manages its own cache. Records become stale. Yeah, this stuff is all, I think, pretty apparent. And then using DNS to distribute traffic, you can actually have multiple IP addresses and use it as a sort of fake load balancer. Yeah. Yeah, you can use it as a fake load balancer. You can also use it as a real load balancer. I mean, this is sort of what your load balancer could do. It's just typically not at the DNS level that it's doing it. It's typically that you've already gotten an IP address and you route the request somewhere else. So CDN, our proxies are typically closer to a particular consumer. Doesn't need to contact your servers, frees up resources. But I mean, it's just different servers doing the job. A site location could be based on load, legal compliance. CDN may be behind a load balancer. Typically wouldn't be behind the same load balancer that your web layer is behind. Push and pull. Yeah. Okay. So I think this is all pretty good. Global and region load balancing would only be DNS. Yeah, actually that's true. Because it would have to be at the, well, I guess it doesn't have to be. It all depends on how big the traffic is, but it's probably typically done that way. Yeah, I wonder if I should write more about this. Since you can use DNS for distributing traffic, it becomes a consideration when comparing against other solutions. Yeah. So all right, for example, a hardware load balancer will needs to get I'll say needs to receive and then route traffic through it. Like it would have already received all the traffic to it, i.e. bandwidth, in order for it to route anywhere else. Whereas DNS is queried before even sending the business traffic to the server. I wonder if I wrote about Anycast anywhere here. Yeah. Methodology by which one IP address can route to any number of destination endpoints. This is how DNS works. It's one IP address, but they have hundreds of endpoints behind it. It's also how CDNs could work. Yeah. but that was much lower in the list. In fact, there's a lot of other things before that. Wow. These are quite a lot of notes. I thought this wouldn't be as dense as the other ones, but I guess it's because each note is a lot longer. Like this is one line, but it's what, 2 or 3 sentences. Yeah. Yeah, but I think we've hit a level of density right now that I'd like to resume later and not necessarily cover all of this today. So it's Tuesday. Friday is the Amazon interview, and then Monday is the Google interview. And I'm gonna say we're pretty much done for today. So we have Wednesday and Thursday being up in the air. I think that for Wednesday I'm going to just pick up from here and then just do random stuff, then do random tasks, whatever I think is important. I think for Thursday I'm leaning toward not having a stream and maybe not even just doing anything for prep that day. I don't feel like I'm burning out at the pace that I'm going right now. I for sure felt that way when I was just doing LeetCode nonstop. Good God. Have I tried converting them into flashcards? No, I haven't. And yeah, I'm not sure if I will. Yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't hurt to play video games before the interview, except for Smash. That was the dumbest idea. God, I get so riled up playing Smash. I just can't. Like, my wife came over and hugged me the other day. She's like, "Why are you so hot?" I was like, I don't know. My blood is just on fire right now. So, yeah, got to be careful about which video games you play. Animal Crossing, probably okay. You know? Katamari, probably okay. All right. Hey, Soul Sorcerers. How you doing? She meant hot in temperature, to be clear. All right. I'm going to go host somebody. Let's host Kiboga. I want to host him because I want him to read my Discord message. I'm trying to reach out to him. He won't read my message. All right. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the stream, you want to follow up on Discord or anything, there's a link. I don't really care at this point. I don't have much to market. So thanks for watching. I'll be back online tomorrow. We'll just pick up from here. We'll do more system design prep stuff and then maybe some LeetCode. I don't know. But take care. Have a good rest of your day. Bye, guys.